How big can a person be, such that there is no way to move around the world without someone's help? When he stepped on the ground, the whole village thought there was an earthquake. No one could understand what was happening. But that was just Master Chu practicing, because he had a goal to lose weight as quickly as possible, because he had a big competition with the enemy waiting for him. However, even the touch of a mosquito is enough to make him fall, so much so that he was clumsy, and any battle was out of the question. On a walk, he dislocated his shoulder. His multi-ton body began to fall to the ground, so that in the neighboring houses shook the plates on the tables. Things he did not wear for a long time because not one master could not make such a dense material that could withstand the pressure of his body. He fell on the floor and hurt his arm very badly. But was it always like that? What should one do to bring one's body to such a state? Actually, no, it all started many years ago. When the gods attacked the great village, they started doing whatever they wanted, even burning down houses. No one could resist their power, so everyone just had to flee, leaving their homes and saving their lives. There was no other choice. That was the day his parents died. In this unfair fight, his house was destroyed and he was left an orphan. But now he's gone back in time to confront the evil gods and deal with it all. However, he's trapped in this fat guy's body and needs to deal with this problem somehow. He has only 6 months to save the village and overcome all the enemies that want to harm his village. He needs to get to the great ginseng root first, because if the gods capture it faster, then all his training and preparation is completely pointless. But hell, it's going to take at least 16 months to get this body in shape. He just doesn't have that much time. He needs to figure something out. Odette starts yelling at the herbalist and tells him that he promised his son would be fine and that he's not doing anything to save him. But then Chu gets up and says that he needs to go for a walk. Otherwise, he'll take so long to get himself back in order. His father immediately ordered the strongest slaves in the palace to come and help Chu go out for some fresh air. But Chu refused to help. He does not want to be carried again because so he will not lose weight, so he decided to get up himself. The helper picked him up under his arms and started to help him walk. It was very hard for him because Chu is not very light. Here he takes his first steps. His father looks at all this and he has a memory that he also took his steps as a child, and after many years he walks again. The courtiers look at all this and wonder how it is that Chu for so many years only lay and sat, and everything was brought to him, and now he walks on his own. Started training, the trainer shouts that if he wants to lose weight, he must remove all sugar from his diet. Otherwise, nothing will work out. But before everything, you have to do a check weighing. Chu sits on the scale, and in the counterweight is driven a lot of pigs. However, the rope that should withstand several tons just breaks, while Chu has not even moved a centimeter. Chu realizes that it will not go on like this, and that it will take him a long time to achieve a perfect body. That he needs to find another way to lose weight. And if he doesn't find it within 6 months, the gods will start creating havoc throughout the village again. But what to do? Or maybe it's worth thinking about an alternative solution to the problem. Would such an option even be possible? Or would it be necessary to do something, or is there a way out? Of course, if he gets to the great city before the gods and gets the ginseng root, they won't have enough power to burn down the whole city. From this thought, Chu began to smile. This was the solution to his problem, and how he could solve all the issues faster. His laughter began to fill the rooms of the palace. The aide didn't understand why he was rejoicing and thought he was crazy. So he rather ran to the palace to call the witch doctor before it was too late, for the training seemed to be bad for his health. Runs the great witch doctor Lin. Already in his 20s, he began to serve at the court, while his fellow students closed the exams. And at the age of 50, he began to teach his medicine, which was very successful. He must know the way to lose weight quickly. As soon as Lin ran up to Chu, he asks him if he has a way for him to lose weight fast because he doesn't have much time to wait. Long workouts and proper diet is not what he needs right now. He needs some potion that will solve his problem. The healer says no, there is no such remedy, but you can use the power of water, of course, Chu thought. While they walked to the lake, the assistants were already lying tired. They did not expect that Chu so quickly want to go to the lake. Why he wants to lose weight at all. Chu started to go into the water. How could he not remember before the great property of water pushing out? It was pretty easy for him to move around in the water, so he decided it was worth it to go further in. Advancing forward, Chu suddenly stumbled, the ground abruptly going downward, forcing him to go to the bottom. With a splash, Chu's giant body went underwater. He did not even have time to blink an eye. On the surface, only circles on the water told that someone had been here. The young master's servant, thinking that he was amusing himself, only smiled at Chu's playfulness. Who would have thought that he would enjoy swimming so much? Chu went underwater deeper and deeper, where the blue water only thickened. Panic was getting the better of him. Suddenly, one of the servants realized that it could not happen, that under the water there was a cliff, and the young master just drowns. Panic covered the servant, who realized the situation because it was no joke to lose his master in such a stupid way. Chu gradually lost consciousness from lack of oxygen. In front of his eyes, everything swam and darkened. In front of Chu's eyes surfaced a picture of a wagon pulled by two horses rushing through the forest. On it were visible traces of arrow hits. He was like a ghost watching the events. A woman was holding a baby wrapped in a blanket with sadness in her eyes. She was obviously badly wounded and was fading away before her eyes. An unknown girl suddenly surfaced with Chu, who was unconscious. She dragged him to the shore and lowered his body to the ground with a terrible rumble. The servants at once rushed to pump up their young master. The two culprits knelt down and looked at Chu's father in horror, who was clearly furious and incredibly indignant at what had happened. It seemed as if his aura had taken on the appearance of fire and surrounded him in a furious stream, ready to sizzle those who caused the owner's rage. Huang, unable to withstand the pressure, blurted out that it was the imperial physician's idea, laying him to waste. Father Chu, even more enraged and grabbed a sword, rushed at the physician, but he was stopped in time and did not give the act of retaliation. Without letting the situation escalate into something more, a girl came inside and attracted everyone's attention with her voice. Unexpectedly, she was the voice of reason and suggested that the healer should explain his position and argue his point of view. The healer was not confused and said that the young gentleman wanted to lose weight, and that was why he had suggested this method. Hearing this, Chu's father pulled himself together, as he had completely forgotten about his son's feelings. In the resulting silence, suddenly heard the voice of a girl who suggested that the young master be allowed to swim, because it can be done not only in the stream. Chu lay and reflected on the fact that he almost drowned in the stream, and even that is not the sea. Looking at the girl's face, Chu couldn't understand why she was so beautiful, not believing that she could be related to his current body. His sister's maid headed over to Chu with the desire to help him get to his feet and set off at last. Chu did not believe that she can do anything, even tried to dissuade her, because before he was lifted by 4 strong men, and that with difficulty. But surprisingly, she was able to lift him to his feet without any effort. Loading in the palanquin, Chu could not understand why the porters are in such a good mood, and they cannot even say that they give them this way with difficulty. He all pondered and pondered. These guys were clearly not simple, since so easily and not forced to carry him. In front of Chu opened a sight that surprised him a lot. People in sweat were digging a hole, lining the walls with stones. Coming closer and looking at the excavation site, he could not understand what it is, whether they are digging a grave. His sister clarified the situation by explaining that now he would not have to go to the brook, because now he had his own pond. The workers saw Chu and rushed to greet him. Their faces lit up with smiles. They were very kind and friendly. The young master could not understand why they are so happy, because the old fart exploited them. Should not they be hostile to his son? But the people were very happy to see him, and smiles did not leave their faces. Then Huang ran up to Chu, who immediately inquired about what was going on here. In response, however, Huang explained that his father was a symbol of integrity and always shared food and water with the peasants, keeping their welfare in mind. Chu thought about all that he had heard and seen, because if you add up all the facts, seeing how Sung is not stingy on supplies and always ready to help the workers, he began to realize. And it dawned on him that if there is a rich man who has a good reputation among the people and whom everyone respects, and he is his son, then, after all, to live well, he does not need to do anything at all, because he already has everything. Only now it came to him in full. The beam was smoldering, measuring time, making it clear how long Chu was underwater. And then from under the water came out of the massive body of Chu, that thanks to the artificial pond did not seek to go deep to the bottom. Huang has already prepared a massive steel ball on a chain, which should help with training. Coming out of the water on Chu was fixed weight with a steel hoop around his ankle. After securing the ball, Huang threw the weight into the water with all his might, and Chu flew after it. The heavy iron core quickly went to the bottom, pulling Chu with it, keeping him securely below. Because of his weight, Chu could not assume the lotus posture, so he decided to limit himself to standing meditation for the time being. Concentrating, he began to gather spiritual energy, spiraling it and absorbing it. In front of C formed a luminous ball of golden energy that with each passing moment arrived and absorbed, making the glow more and more intense. Having gained the right amount of energy, he opened his eyes to maximize his concentration, preparing for the next stage. A smile crept on Chu's lips. He was able to absorb the spiritual energy and direct it to his heart, which in turn began to disperse it throughout the body. Feeling the power of the spiritual energy again, he could now detect the currents of the water that surrounded him. Gradually, he began to spin it around him, forming small swirls. Confident in his strength, Chu decided to test himself in one of the techniques. Throwing forward his foot and placing it firmly on the bottom, he prepared himself. Shaolin's first strongest technique, which can shatter rocks 100 meters away from the practice. Finished with his preparation, Chu abruptly straightened his arm in a punch. Continuing to practice, Chu blurred as if in a dance, smoothly moving from one pose to another. Sharp sweeps of his hands were like the blow of a sword that cut through the water column, passing it without even noticing it. Chu performed lightning-fast lunges, another technique, the heavenly sword of the Namgung Kalan. Huang sat on the shore, wondering how long the young master could hold his breath underwater. Had his talent awakened after he had almost drowned? He's been practicing like this for a month. Chu surfaced from the water with a smile, completely satisfied with himself, and without even catching his breath, he called out to Huang. Back home, it was a very important moment for Chu, the moment to measure his weight. Huang prepared a scale, and Chu, a little hesitating, still decided to stand on the platform of the scale. And surprisingly, his efforts were not in vain. The arrow of the scale showed a much smaller value than in the first weighing. Uncontrollable joy possessed both Chu and Huang, who was also happy for his young master. Chu hugged Huang and thanked him, for without his support he would not have succeeded in such a short period of time. Having rested, Huang began to talk about how wonderful it is that now the servants will not have to sew clothes that are always torn, that the palanquin porters will be much easier, and that according to rumors, Chu refused to marry because he was too fat. The latter was unnecessary. This was the last drop Chu did not on a joke flared up. Still, Huang clearly does not know how to feel the atmosphere and does not understand when to stop. But what Huang did realize was that he should flee, so he rushed off to do his own thing. Chu sat down to meditate after all. He had gained spiritual energy and lost a lot of weight. But this was only the beginning. Spiritual energy is something people acquire through a lot of training. But this path could be shortened by consuming spiritual plants, which of course would reduce the potential, which was why Chu needed virgin ginseng. Chu's thoughts were cut short by the healer, who brought a useful medicinal decoction designed to restore his strength. Taking that in his hands, literally snatching it from the healer, Chu instantly drank the entire decoction. But as you know, medicines are usually bitter to the taste. The same realized Chu too late. He was left only to unhappily throw the bowl. Going into the house, he began to meditate to collect and restore spiritual energy. Taking deep breaths, Chu literally absorbed energy with the air. Drop by drop, Chu absorbed the spiritual power. Soon he will be able to meet that demon. After meditation, Chu Snav began to drink the healing decoction, which surprised Huang knowing the taste of this brew. He also decided to diversify his training, so now Chu went up the mountain on foot. Another 2 months later, Chu stood underwater continuing his grueling training, concertizing his spiritual strength. He moved on to more complex techniques, so gathering energy and releasing it with a sharp push with an open palm, Chu created a powerful stream of water. At the same time, a large wave rose on the surface from the impact. Huang, seeing this, could not believe his eyes. He could not believe that this arrogant pig was able to use the palm technique. He was thinking in his ear without noticing anyone. But in vain Huang was so engrossed, because in the middle of the speech did not notice how Chu's father was behind him, and he was clearly not happy to hear such a thing about his son. Taking the sword of the chief manager, he already thought to chop the insolent in pieces, but he was not allowed to do so. The chief steward fit, ordering the servants to drag Huang into the dungeon, thus saving his skin from the anger of the patriarch of the family. Huang's face as he was dragged along the ground like a sack of potatoes expressed great gratitude. In his mind, he was thanking the manager for such a mercy. Chu's father, forgetting about the recent misunderstanding, was literally glowing with joy because his son had just practiced martial arts. Deciding to support his son's endeavors, he ordered the manager to bring paper, ink, and brush, intending to write a letter. A little later, Chu gathered at the manor and presented a book of martial arts that would now serve his training. He was given the Divine Sky technique. It wasn't that thick of a martial arts study book. Chu's father was very pleased with himself, saying that it was a secret technique from the imperial palace itself, surprising Chu with such influence. Moreover, stating that he had written to the emperor only once, as the emperor immediately replied to him. In reality, he actually wrote letters every day, at one point even losing faith that the emperor would answer him. In the courtyard, Chu was introduced to his new teacher, his sister's husband, who unexpectedly turned out to be skilled in martial arts. Chung, so he was called, was rather handsome in the face, and did not give the impression of an experienced shirt slinger. Chu's father began to praise Chun, because he belonged to one of the best fighting clans. Thereby rubbing his ego, it seemed that his butt will soon break through the heavens. Chu thought only about the fact that the past him, the head of this clan on his knees, would beg for training. Maybe it was worth it to tell them the truth. But imagining what would happen to his new father, decided to hold off. But then an idea came to his mind, how to legalize his skills. If he said that he learned from the head of the clan Dan, there should be no problems. And all his techniques will write off. On the Emperor's gift book, Divine Sky, it will be difficult to check this. Having decided everything for himself, Chu fell to his knees in front of Chun, asking him to accept his bow as a student before the master. By this he greatly moved his father. In his thoughts, he exalted his son, for he had become so respectful. Training went on its way. Chu tried to fulfill all the requirements of his new teacher, which was still salty given the state of his body. Having stood in the first stance as required by Chun, he tried to concentrate, but again lost his balance and could barely stay on his feet. Chun was spewing tons of resentment at him. How come he couldn't do the simplest thing? He was tormenting Chu and bringing him to a boil. At Chu's suggestion to try another rack, he received even more negativity. A lot of words about his lack of talent and maturity. This was the last straw in Chu's cup of calm. This was the kind of attitude he wasn't going to tolerate, considering he was just playing along without showing obvious progress to avoid suspicion. Straightening up and glaring at the pouting Chun, he decided to set the record straight by offering to test his skills in combat. Chung's laughter made even the birds flying over the estate shocked, for some underachiever to fight him. Chu, clearly mocking and picking his nose, suggested that Chun had chickened out and was simply afraid to fight him. This also hit Chun in the heart. Falling for a childish trick on weakness, he began to threaten that he used to be part of the dragon family. But Chu's further provocations forced him to agree to spar. Interrupting in anger, he no longer thought who challenged him. But Chun said he didn't intend to fight at full strength because it wouldn't be fair, so he blocked his spiritual channels with a thumb strike to the base of his neck. At the same time, he tied his right arm to his torso. When the preparations were complete, Chun shouted that he was ready and even gave him the right of first strike. Chu was fine with this and began to concentrate his energy for the strike. With a sharp jerk, he rushed towards Chun, gaining speed with each step. He surprised his arrogant opponent. Having flown to the distance of a blow with his hand, Chu swung his right hand, preparing a crushing uppercut. Firing upward like a spring, he directed his fist to the chin of his opponent, but he dodged, only surprised by such a jump. Despite his agility problems due to his body condition, Chu continued his attacking combination, coming in from the right side, just where Chun's arm was locked. He threw a strong punch to the side, which he could not escape. But Chu was not finished, finishing the attack with a scathing swinging punch with the back of his fist. Having knocked Chun to the ground, Chu thought that he had not taught the arrogant enough, so he hovered over him and prepared to beat him into the dirt with his fists. Chun could not believe his eyes. Impossible, he said, to which Chu only squinted contentedly, said that he was, after all, his disciple. At the same time, Huang pecked his nose while standing guard at the gate. It was an order and punishment for him to stand there without proper rest. Here came Chu, calling Huang, inquired whether he was satisfied with the demotion, and whether it was not too easy for him to serve since he managed to doze off at his post. Huang had no answer but asked why the young master was not in training, to which the natural answer was given that the teacher was not in a condition to train. The teacher himself was lying down all bandaged, next to his wife and part-time sister Chu. He complained to her how everything hurts and itches, but she was happy that her brother was so talented. After telling Chun to rest and he would feel better, she decided to leave him alone. The horse-drawn carriage was approaching the entrance to the city. Inside, a man sat in the light semi-darkness and did not make a sound. But as it turned out, he was not alone. His interlocutor, upon the arrival of the carriage at the destination, said that he did not see the point of personal participation. But he was adamant in his desire to visit the clan, ordering a coachman to take them to the address. Chu, on the other hand, strolled around the city contemplating his surroundings. He was curious about the world before the chaos. Suddenly he noticed a group of men discussing something around one of the stalls. Looking at such a quiet and peaceful life, Chu succumbed to memories of how the servants of chaos fell upon the world. His gaze glazed over, seeing nothing but those events before him. When they appeared and took over the world, darkness swallowed up light and joy. There was no resting place left on earth. But his reflections were interrupted by the inhabitants who saw the young lord. Their faces were filled with joy. They pelted him from all sides, looking at him like some kind of animal. They marveled that he could walk on his own without help, some of them not even knowing that he could do it. One of the girls decided to offer him meat on a spit as a gift. Considering that Chu was thin and on a diet, the offer was very tempting. Seeing this, all the inhabitants decided to make a present to the young master and began to bring what they could. Seeing this attitude on Chu even descended obsession, that he cannot just take it all like this, to lead such a life. Suddenly he felt someone's gaze, but turning his head and did not see anyone. Perhaps it was just a vision, he thought. Around the corner there was a man in dark clothes and a wide-brimmed straw hat. He couldn't have noticed me, he thought, and was about to leave when Chu's hand was on his shoulder, asking what he was doing here. The unknown reacted quickly and very aggressively. Swinging, he hit Chu. The blow came out very powerful and fast. Not ready for such a Chu did not even have time to react. Chu's body, as if shot from a cannon, he flew across the street until he was stopped by the wall of the house in which he flew into. When the dust clouds cleared, people could see the young gentleman lying knocked out among the debris of the wall. The assailant hastened to escape by jumping on the roof and running. He was followed by people shouting to catch the intruder. When Chu came to his senses, he was furious, ready to tear his assailant with his bare hands. The people were in confusion, not knowing how to react to the attack and to this behavior of their master. After pulling himself together and seeing the looks of the people, Chu hurriedly assured that he was fine and decided to leave the scene, thinking that it was worth improving his fighting skills. At Chu's house, his father was having a conversation with his daughter. The latter was very happy about his son's success, prophesying him to be a great commander and already thinking about where to place him. Sister Chu was more restrained in her feelings and asked not to make so much noise. After all, it is too early to talk about such things. The words that such haste caused by the Namugun clan with the heiress of which Chu was to marry upset that. Hai Namugun did not want to marry since childhood, intending to become a martial artist that is not obliged to anyone. Noticing the man's condition, she realized that no, it wasn't about Hai. It was about the cause of his wife's death. His enemies had pursued him but killed her, which he still blamed himself for. After all, he was the one who should have died in her place. A horse-drawn carriage with 4 horses was on its way, while inside the 2 men continued their conversation. The members of the Namugan clan assumed that the talk would be about marriage again. There were not the most pleasant rumors about Chu, about his laziness, fullness, and characterlessness. But still they continued on their way. Here one of the men pointed a finger somewhere. They had to find out everything about Chu, only there could they get rid of him forever. Chu sneezed. It was no other way than someone remembering him. He thought it was just someone admiring him behind his back. Going into the alley, Chu could not find anyone. The face was completely empty, which was quite strange for this place. He decided to check everywhere he could, even looked at the paint, but everywhere was empty. Absolutely no one. Chu could not understand where everyone had gone. Suddenly, from around the corner, looked out a man with a broom, immediately inquired, "What is doing here, young gentleman?" Chu decided to ask where all the poor people have gone, because they were always full of them here. To which he received an answer from a perplexed man that Chu's father 20 years ago built houses and gave land to cultivate all the poor. But then Chu remembered that he had once been told about the poor that the walls have ears, and if closer to reality, the poor, that's exactly who do not pay attention and from whom you can learn a lot. Beggars hide in the shadows of the walls, in every alley and nook. Those who have their own network of informants, those who have filled the whole world, and they are called the Beggar Clan. And then Chu realized that since there were no beggars here now, there was no clan as such, and there was no one to get information from. At the table sat a man, one of those who rode here on the carriage. He was the head of the clan Namugan. Opposite him sat and drank tea a man of unpretentious appearance, which contrasted sharply with him. Instead of the patriarch of the clan spoke a man of ragged appearance. He suggested that they need information about Chu to stop trying to marry and get rid of him once and for all. However, as expected from a beggar clan, thought the patriarch. But the beggar clan member said that he could not provide such information, clearly bargaining, although he didn't confess to it. The second man couldn't understand what was the point of withholding information about the son of a scholar, so even the head. But he was interrupted by the patriarch with a wave of his hand. The matter in the family confessed informant, the rage of their old man to harm not only the local branch, and the whole organization as a whole. After thinking for a while, the patriarch threw a bag full of silver on the table, hinting at the seriousness of his intentions. But the informant stood his ground. They needed the permission of the head, otherwise they would refuse to work. The patriarch, without changing his face, took off from his finger an expensive-looking ring and put it on the table. The patriarch's son was dumbfounded because the one who owns it receives full protection from the Namgung clan. Such things are not given for nothing. Chu approached a rich-looking house. Funny that it was a branch of the Beggar Clan. The appearance did not match the name at all. No wonder it took him so long to find it. Tolku Chu was about to enter as to his neck was brought to the sword in the legs. The guard, calling that fatty, refused to let Chu inside, motivated by the fact that there are now important guests. Deciding to ignore the insolent because he is now not a simple commoner and the only heir to the family, Yu Chu headed forward. But only after taking a step, he was hit with a scabbard on the back of the head. The guard had clearly crossed the line, and he was clearly not going to let Yu Chu get away with something like this. With a bloodthirsty grin, he called him closer, intending to teach him a lesson. In an unknown room, 2 men in dark clothes and straw hats were reporting to their head. Their uniforms resembled those of the man who attacked Chu. After listening to the report, the unknown man drew some conclusions only he could understand and thought, "Sung, how is that old tiger doing?" The informant was giving the clan head the requested information about Chu, everything they could find from the time of his birth until yesterday. Handing over the notebook, he warned that no one should know about it. Taking the notes out of his hands, he swore in the name of the clan that no one would know about it. The whole story would remain secret. The informant said goodbye and hurried away. The patriarch opened the records and plunged into reading after a short time was interrupted by shouts coming from the street. Asking his son to check what the matter was, he continued reading. The patriarch's son looked out the window and saw Chu standing in front of the guard who had struck him on the head with the scabbard, and tension was clearly hanging between them. On the guard's cheek there was an abrasion from the blow, as it was not hard to guess Chu had tried. Even so, he consoled himself with the thought that he wasn't ready, so he missed the blow. Chu continued to piss him off, criticizing all his movements and techniques that he used. His kung fu was clearly worse than Chu's. The attacker was angry at the criticism, thinking that it was directed at his clan's style. It wasn't. He was just a clear underachiever, which Chu hastened to inform him. Chu also suggested that he simply apologize and he would forgive him. He had no time to waste on any of the scum. This was the trigger for the guy. He jumped out of his seat and attacked, lunging with his naked blade, angry at the insult to the Namgung clan. Chu dodged without problems, even somehow lazy for such a situation, saying that he was the first to bear his sword. Chu prepared for a serious fight. Ducking down from the line of attack and swinging, Chu made a dash upward at the fat guy, who did not expect such a leap from the fat guy. A powerful blow fell on the torso of the guy, tearing him off the ground for half a meter and knocking all the air out of his lungs, which did not add to the opponent's leap. Not stopping there, Chu caught the guy by the hair and made a powerful blow right on the head of the opponent, finally knocking him out of balance. Then followed another blow, this time kicked the stranger into the ground and raised a cloud of dust. See through one blow after another on the already broken face of the boy, blow after blow, directly hammering manners into the ignoramus. But then he was interrupted by a shout to stop coming from somewhere above. Looking at the source of the sound, Chu managed to notice a silhouette quickly approaching him. A hard landing, and there was a new actor in front of Chu. Jumping back and taking a couple steps, Chu broke the distance to the new opponent. But he did not wait and rushed after him, rapidly reducing the distance and accumulating spiritual energy in his hand. Chu recognized the technique that was used by the patriarch's son was an explosive lightning mystical palm. The realization came quickly. In this body, Chu could not defeat him. The only thing left was not to lose. Alternatively, there was another option. Getting ready, Chu also began to concentrate the energy in his hand, preparing to take the blow. The opponents were rapidly approaching. Such a blow is difficult to block, so Chu was going to redirect the energy and neutralize the momentum. Finally, they collided in a confrontation. Chu with two hands encircled his fist, trying to extinguish the blow. At this moment, the patriarch decided to look outside with a question about the noise going on here, and just caught the moment of collision. Chu gradually lost the lead and gave up. Passed. Muscular arms covered with scars held a sword, while the owner of the hands was counting down the number of blows made in training. 29,996. 29,997. Past Chu stood balancing on a plank on the peak of a sharp rock. His sword swings made the water flow away from the strong gusts of wind. Chu did not keep his balance and fell forward into the water, yet the structure underneath was extremely unstable. His teacher was dissatisfied. Chu was not holding the sword enough, so as punishment he was ordered to perform another 10,000 swings. Night. Two men are fighting in the middle of a field on swords. Their clanging can be heard for many tens of meters around. At some point, the battle comes to a standstill. The swords once again clashed in a confrontation, both opponents trying to overpower each other to take the advantage. Chu still could not withstand the pressure and sagged under the onslaught, for which he immediately received a powerful knee strike to the solar plexus. Falling to the ground trying to catch his breath, Chu dropped his sword and looked at his teacher. He was not pleased with him. Chu immediately begged for mercy, asking his teacher to stop beating him, to spare him, and to let him rest for a while. His teacher's smile was his answer, but did not reflect his mentor's true feelings. Furious at this attitude of his student to weapons and training, the teacher lectured that a real enemy would not spare him, and that he who threw his weapon was not worthy to live. He immediately swung his fist to convey this science in a more accessible form. Present! Chu missed a punch and was flying backwards off the ground. The attack was really powerful and he couldn't deal with it. Chu could not understand what broke his concentration, because before that everything had gone according to plan and he could stop the attack, but he could not. The same rushed to him. The servants recognized that. His opponent stood in thought. The explosive force of the blow, although it was not completely neutralized, but significantly dispersed, Chu managed. And how he did it was not clear to him. Chu received damage from the blow, but not enough to knock him out. Began to boil. The veins swelled at his temples, and anger came closer and closer. Finally coming to his senses, Chu literally became the embodiment of rage, intending to pick up and kill the bastard who dared to attack him. Standing already surrounded by servants, he tried to drill a hole in his opponent with his gaze, but suddenly fell backwards. By then, the others, including the blonde-haired informant, had come out of the building. Turning first to the clan patriarch, he immediately noticed someone lying on the ground. It was Chu, that directly exuded streams of rage even lying down. The blow clearly did not go in his favor, so he had to recover horizontally. After taking a closer look at the one lying on the ground, the informant from the beggar clan recognized him as a young lord and immediately rushed to him to check his condition. Asking who dared to do such a thing to the young lord, all attention was turned to the patriarch's son, and the eyes of the people were filled with rage. The young man realized that all the attention was directed to him, and even less friendly, and cast a glance at his father, but he saw no support there. Realizing what was going on, the patriarch decided that he did not need the information collected on Chu, because it clearly did not reflect the real side of things. Taking the records, he resolutely tore them up. By that time, Chu's father had already arrived and immediately launched a verbal attack on his son's abusers. He knew that this could happen, and that the beggar clan was involved. Causing the blonde-haired man to be frightened, he immediately began to justify himself without a second thought, laying down the Namgung clan. The head of the Namgung clan tried to justify that the attack was done out of ignorance, and his son was not at fault. But such arguments did not pay off. Why attack people at all? Chu's father was very angry. If it wasn't for the fact that the man against him was quite powerful and could become Chu's name brother in the future, his head would have been off his shoulders long ago. The beggar clan member whispered for him to fall to his knees and apologize, because Chu's father was a very respected man. Even the emperor listened to him. When Chu's father was already thinking of going to the emperor after informing his son-in-law about this, it came to Namgung that things were bad. This was no longer a joke. Falling to their knees, the two began to apologize to each other, trying to cover up the incident and make the situation worse. Chu's father once again became enraged. His son is almost dying, but these two continue to cling to his feet, his only son. Suddenly the door opened and out flew Chu. He was wondering what all the commotion outside was about. He had a hairstyle on his head that he didn't understand where it came from. Girls that passed by very pleased with this hairstyle. Apparently one of the maids at the house tried braiding them in such a way while Chu was unconscious. Father, seeing that his son came to himself, hastened to ask if he is okay, and the informant from the beggar clan immediately rushed to Chu with unclear intentions. When he got there, he started jumping around Chu like a dog, incredibly happy that the young master was fine. Simultaneously marveling at Chu's strength and complimenting him, he caused Chu only irritation. Suddenly, Chu bowed in a bow to the black-haired man, showing him honor as his older brother. Yet their kinship bound them together. Chu was clearly up to something. As he bowed, a sly smile crept onto Chu's face. He wouldn't just leave it at that, but it would be later. Unbending, Chu decided to wonder what they were talking about while he was gone. Chu's father said that he wanted to go to the emperor to punish the bastard who attacked Chu. He could not forgive him. But Chu so far decided to soften the situation, friendly greeting his opponent, whose name was Sun. Technically, Chu was his uncle, even though he was younger. With a darkened face, Chu pulled Sun's cheek and began to reprimand him for disrespecting him. As it turned out, it was his still young teacher that was to teach him in the future. Although it was more likely that he was a torturer for Chu, to get back for such a thing was a holy thing. The past. Chu was once again fighting teacher Sun, one of the 6 saints, who was a real psycho obsessed with training. When Chu was distracted, Sun would not miss an opportunity to give him a good beating with the flat side of his sword, without sparing him. Chu was already lying on the ground and hugging Sung's legs, asking for mercy. He had no more strength to endure these beatings. But Song saw that Chu again threw his sword and begged for mercy, became furious, and swung his sword like some kind of club to continue the shock therapy. In real combat, you won't beg for mercy from the enemy, said Song, preparing another lesson for Chu. Present. Chu now understood the hitch that prevented him from taking Sun's punch, his body reacting to that punch on its own. Finished with introductions, everyone decided to gather at the same table in the Chu family's estate. Everyone honored some awkwardness, but still started a conversation. Chu was interested in what his older brother had forgotten here. Chu assumed that those here because of the wedding, but Chu did not have time for such a thing, which he hurried to inform everyone, which surprised the interlocutor. Chu refused with words that he still had a lot to learn, a lot to figure out, to get to know many people, and even to share the work together with them, to know the world even beyond Morim. Father Chu was very surprised by this statement, saying that the world beyond Morim is very dangerous, filled with murderers, bandits, and other scoundrels. Chu objected that Namgung was a thug. Once again, he surprised his father, who hadn't even thought of such a thing. Chu went on to say that martial arts practitioners have their own way. He tried to slip off topic, but Namgung didn't read the situation and didn't understand what was even going on. Chu decided to just end the dialogue. After politely saying goodbye to everyone, he turned around and started walking away. Noticing the blonde-haired man whose name was Hyun, Chu beckoned him over, and the man gladly agreed, quickly running up to Chu. Smiling evilly and leaning closer to Hyun, Chu said they should talk outside. The rest of the people left inside looked around uncomprehendingly without realizing what had happened, clearly feeling a bit awkward. Hen started the conversation with Chu's hairstyle, which clearly didn't match. But instead of saying so, he decided to praise the young master's hair. Chu, only noticing the hairstyle, got a little angry, starting to smooth and unbraid his hair. They dialogued as Hen tried to ingratiate himself to Chu, marveling at his knowledge of Murim. Chu, on the other hand, recalled his cursed teachers, that he had been tortured, trained for a long time. Chu's aura flashed with negativity at such memories, while Hen continued to ingratiate himself to him. Thinking over the situation and his actions in front of Chu, decided to knit his first student son, already imagining how he will torture him. It will be a good revenge. Chu stood on the shore continuing training. Near stood Huang, which asked him to rest a little. But Chu did not care about this. He stubbornly went to his goal, looking at the obstacles. His attitude towards Huang worsened, as Chu's sister came and began to instruct him, speaking about rest and attention to himself and his body. Her maid guard was with her. Huang saw the second immediately puffed up and straightened up as if he had swallowed a crowbar. He obviously breathed unevenly to the maid, but he could not surprise anyone. As Chu approached, his sister began to warn her brother of the danger. Murima, after all, their mother also died. At these words, Chu's sister lost her composure. Fear for the family, and Chu in particular, came over her. Chu saw this behavior of his sister, decided to ask what's wrong with her, because it is so unlike her. Deciding to support his sister, Chu assured that nothing bad would happen to their Yu clan now. He would take care of it. Smiling radiantly at the end of the speech. The sister was pleasantly surprised by such a speech. A smile also appeared on her lips. Her brother has grown up and is no longer a child once ready to take responsibility. She had seen a little boy in front of her all the time, but now her brother had grown up and it was time for her to realize that. Chu was surprised by such words. A blurry human silhouette jumped out of the pond, flying out like a bullet towards the shore. It was a statuesque young man with broad shoulders and an athletic figure that was visible even through his clothes. As it was not difficult to understand, it was Chu, but although he lost weight, but the skin that had been all this time stretched in order did not come and hung in shreds. Chu's father was alarmed. His son had lost weight by force, left only skin and bones, so he could just break at the first fall. Chu planned to travel, saying he planned to stay in the Namgun clan. Chu reasoned that he wanted to see Sun since he was part of their family. In reality, he was going to start training. Despite his father's objections, Chu had already decided everything for himself and promised to return safely and in one piece, and got up from the table and went to pack his things. Sitting in his room, he went through the things that may be needed on the way. He couldn't travel under his real name, so he decided to take a name from the past, Jin. Gathering his things into one bundle and placing it behind his back, he swung open the door, ready for new accomplishments and the path that awaited him. But just as he stepped out, he was confronted with a bunch of people waiting for him at the exit. Huang approached him and introduced the delegation that would accompany him to his destination. That's exactly what Chu's father did to keep his son safe. But this was definitely not Chu's plan. The plan was to get the virgin ginseng and kill the chaos servant, but with such a crowd, it wouldn't work. No one must know, because then father will make a fuss and Chu won't be able to explain his actions. He can't be caught. But then Chu came up with a plan. First, you need to get rid of Huang. To do this, he offered him a drink together. Chu said that Huang always helped and protected him, and they never had a drink once. Under the bandages hiding his face, Chu smirked. Night descended on the Yu clan's estate. It was just about time for Chu to escape. Under the night sky, Sister Chu and her maid were walking along, having a leisurely conversation. She decided to visit Chu. The maid always dressed Chu in funny outfits and made fancy hairstyles when he was still fat. Suddenly, Chu's sister asked the maid who he reminded her of, to which she replied that of course it was her young mistress. Having finished with the conversation and letting the maid go, the girl decided to go on alone. Chu put on a wide-brimmed hat, quietly opened the door, intending to leave without disturbing anyone. Huang was lying on the floor, having received a shocking dose of alcohol and a little special poison, sleeping soundly. When he suddenly screamed, he raised his hand up and continued to mumble incomprehensibly. He was just talking in his sleep. The poison in Chu's hands dissipated his internal energy, ensuring that Huang would be incapacitated until morning. Suddenly, Chu noticed his sister approaching him. She spoke first, asking if Chu would even say goodbye. She looked quite sad. Her sadness was literally overflowing as her favorite brother is leaving home. Chu was surprised to find her here, but then suddenly hugged her brother, not trying to dissuade him from his scheme, but only asking him to come back soon. She said that if it got too hard, he could come back anytime. He and his father would always be waiting for him. Chu was amazed again. In the past, he had never had anyone who cared for him and worried about him like that. After preparing the horse and loading his belongings on it, Chu prepared to leave. This horse had been suggested to him by his sister, a gift from the emperor himself. Jumping into the saddle and looking at his home for the last time imprinted home place in the memory of Chu went on the road. He was sorry to leave his home, but no one but he knows of the impending danger. Chu kept on through the snowy forest throughout the night, approaching the goal of his trip. How at dawn he reached the first item on his list. Stroking his horse's neck and leading him towards the village, Chu was already thinking about his next move. First, he went to a tavern to refresh himself after the long ride. The food disappeared into Chu's mouth at an unbelievable speed. Now that he had lost weight, it was possible to not stick to a strict diet. After throwing the silverware on the table and finishing eating, Chu asked the tavern owner to bring all the ginseng collectors and hunters that know the area well. In the dark room before the man gathered a group of people standing in straight rows. One of them reported that they had discovered the location of virgin ginseng in Hoi province. Overjoyed, the head of the unknown ordered them to move out. Chu stood in front of the people that the tavern owner brought. They are those who know the area well. One of them asked about the purpose of Chu's visit here, while thinking that he looks very suspicious. Perhaps he's an outlaw. Realizing that he was misunderstood, Chu hurriedly explained that he is not a bandit, and the bandages on his face are intended for treatment, and so he came from a neighboring province. He also said that his name is Jin, and he used to work for the Yu clan, and now he is looking for something here in these parts for a former military advisor. Explaining that he was looking for a stone that emitted a purple light, the locals were a bit surprised at the request and thought for a while. One of the people gathered here, despite the strangeness of the stone described, remembered something. When he was young, he got lost in the mountains and came across a strange stone. According to the description, it was what Chu needed. Becoming more serious, he hurried to find out where it was located. For a while, the man thought, but after a while he said that it was on the peak of the pagoda. But you should not go there. In this place was the fortress of the 9 dragons. In other words, the fortress of the mountain robbers who had settled there. This did not scare Chu in the slightest. Now it is clear why no one could not find ginseng, who could guess to look for it in the den of bandits. Taking the hands of the man that knew dear Chu very politely, began to beg him to escort him, because it is very important he must get there at any cost. Seeing the honest, honorable eyes of Chu man briefly thinking decided to agree and take Chu to the place where it is necessary. The others were surprised at the positive answer. Traveling there is not safe at all. Chu was glad that the man agreed. He did not even thank him, ironically, because he understood the danger of such a journey, both for himself and for the guide. They walked for quite a long time, making their way along the mountain paths that were least snowed in. At last they reached the right place. In front of them there was a cleft at the bottom of which the mountain river was raging, so deep that they could not even see the bottom. After thanking the guide once more, Chu asked where exactly he had seen the stone. The man pointed in the direction with his finger. The stone was to be visible at sunset. They waited for the sun to approach the horizon and color the surroundings in red-orange tones. As the sun began to set, the whole area turned scarlet, and the snow only reflected the light of the setting sun even more. And when the sun had almost set behind the mountain peak, Chu could see something. In front of them, one of the rocks began to emit a purple glow. It was exactly what Chu was looking for. Now he was sure. After thanking the guide heartily, Chu decided to give him a golden pendant as a reward and send him back before they ran into the mountain bandits. The man was grateful, surprised, and at the same time embarrassed by the value of the payment. After saying goodbye, Chu walked to the cliff. In the next moment, he simply plunged down the cliff straight into the rushing river. Flying down, avoiding the sharp ledges, Chu approached the surface of the water. Having successfully entered the icy water, Chu surfaced, looking around for a way forward. Since no one could guess that someone would swim across the river in winter, Chu moved towards the fortress. As in the water, he had no equal. Quietly entering the territory, Chu was able to hear the conversation of bandits on the tower. They said something about the captives and their sale into slavery. Deciding to ignore it for now while he searched for ginseng, Chu began to concentrate his energy to find the right thing. But instead he found something else. The bandit who came out of the house was dragging a woman behind him by her hair. His intentions were definitely not peaceful. Throwing the woman to the ground, the bandit began to beat her with his feet and poke fun at her in every possible way, indulging his sadistic nature. Chu watched this picture in indecision. He could not drop everything and go to help, but sitting like this was also wrong. Then from the same house showed a little girl in tears and continued to cry loudly. The bandit immediately noticed her. The woman grabbed the man's leg, begging him not to touch her daughter, for how could he call himself a man after such a thing? But this scoundrel obviously did not care. He had already put his foot to stomp the woman's head into the ground. Here Chu could not stand it. His whole nature demanded to punish this bastard, who clearly can no longer be called a human being. Kicks fell on the head of the poor woman, who miraculously was still alive. Chu was trembling with anger. He could no longer watch this, regardless of the fact that he had snuck in here secretly and was not going to make a fuss. But yet Chu was still hesitant. He was disgusted with himself. How the man didn't even notice him continuing to beat the woman. The girl still continued to cry with grief and helplessness. She felt very sorry for her mother. Chu could not stand it any longer, made a couple of jerks, and was already close to the bandit. And the bandit was close to meeting Chu's fists. Infusing his entire body with spiritual energy, Chu prepared a powerful punch. That mother and the girl, as well as the bandit, did not notice him interrupting him in horror at the situation. But here is one short swing merged into a greased arc, and the bandit falls to the ground with a broken face. Chu was upset that he got covered in that bastard's blood. The clothes were pretty expensive after all. The girl was impressed by the way Chu dealt with the bandit. She was no longer crying, on the contrary. In her eyes could be seen admiration for the savior. The girl asked if Chu came here to save them, to which he slightly irritatedly replied that he was just passing by. But the girl's mother did not share her optimism and expected anything from their new acquaintance. Covering her daughter, she asked in a trembling voice who he was. Stretching out her hand, which seemed to the woman the hand of a giant that had come only to cause pain. Chu only covered them with his cloak. It was still cold outside, especially if they were in the mountains. Realizing that Chu was not threatening them, the woman became more open to dialogue. Chu was able to ask her where the rest of the captives were. The woman pointed her finger at a building next to which there was another bandit. That one noticed them, but Chu just as quickly knocked him out. Picking up the bodies, he dragged inside the house to hide. Throwing them inside as if they were sacks of potatoes, Chu noticed that there were still people in the room. It was a whole crowd of captives, from infants to old men, all of them very frightened. Informed that despite Chu's appearance, Chu had come to rescue them, he pointed behind his back and promised to lead them out of here. Having learned from the captives that there are approximately 50 bandits in the fortress, Chu realized that alone it would be difficult for him. But he could buy time to escape these people. Chu scolded himself in his thoughts for getting involved in all of this, because now the task had become several times more difficult. His thoughts were interrupted by the woman that saved first. Ta wondered what they should do, where to go. Great, at least one confident person, Chu reported that she would lead all the others behind her. The bandit walked into the building looking for his lazy, what he thought were his cloak and axe colleagues. The street was empty. When his gaze lowered, he saw the two unconscious bodies of his associates. Looking menacingly at the crowd of captives, he asked what had happened here, and who had done it. The people, however, only huddled together in a corner. Suddenly, the bandit was struck in the neck with a sharp blow, which brought the unaware bandit to the ground. Behind him stood Chu. Having dealt with the bandit, he looked outside to assess the situation and come up with a further plan. Outside, Chu noticed a watchtower that stood on the edge of the cliff. On the tower was on duty, which was supposed to monitor the area. The watchman was not very closely watching the surroundings, but at the last moment he managed to see something. A hazy human silhouette that blurred with speed was approaching the tower, already almost at the very base. Chu stopped under the tower. In one hand he held a torch, and in the second hand he gathered energy to hit the tower. Having gathered enough, Chu swung and struck the tower. In all directions dispersed a wave of spiritual power, and the foundation of the tower cracked like a spider's web. The tower went flying as if it had been demolished by a masonry gun, and the sentry, who had no time to do anything, flew with it. A scream escaped from the sentry's mouth. The realization that he was flying into the abyss, the bottom of which was not even visible, filled his mind. The captives, who were almost no more, went outside and noticed that the tower was missing, as if it had been ripped out by a hurricane. The destruction of the tower, according to the plan, was the signal to start the escape. The first rescued woman led the others along the agreed route to the exit from the fortress. Chu at the same time was engaged in sabotage, breaking down the doors to the houses and setting fire to the inner utensils with the lash of a torch, making a fire in the fortress. By throwing torches, Chu set fire to house after house. Those flared up like matches after all. Wood burns well, and in the fort everything was made of wood, from the walls to the living quarters. Chu stood in front of the burning house. It was time to make a commotion so that the bandits would definitely not detect the escape. The bandits at the same time were sleeping peacefully in one of the barracks, dreaming and unsuspecting. But then one of them jumped up and his eyes fell on what was going on outside, and the smell of burning also began to reach him. Screaming that the fire had started, he began to wake up the other bandits. They woke up reluctantly, until the meaning of the words came to them. The first awakened bandit had no time to run to the door and go outside, but immediately flew back into the depths of the barracks. When the bandits turned their gaze towards the entrance, they could see a man whose face was covered in bandages, and in his hand he held a torch. It was Chu. Who else? The bandits asked who the hell was he, to which Chu nonchalantly answered them that what do they think he is? An arsonist, of course. Having done his work, Chu began to run away. The whole fort was raised on alarm, and the bandits, who were very displeased with this awakening, began to hunt for him. Chu ran around the corner in the hope of getting away, but was quickly discovered by one of the bandits, who pointed out the direction of the others. Chu ran away, the bandits running after him. If he had the ability to strengthen and absorb energy, he wouldn't have to run. Suddenly, a bandit with a spear flew out at Chu from around another corner, intending to give our arsonist a good chop. Chu quickly reacted and managed to dodge the first attack and prepared to attack. Without slowing down, he elbowed his attacker, hitting him in the solar plexus and knocking him out of the chase. Chu decides that enough running, the pair will triple trap the bandits. He's going to channel energy into his legs to increase his speed. Breaking the attacker's spear, he set it on fire. Now he had 2 torches. The bandit guards stood at the passageway to the fortress, not paying attention to what was going on. From their angle, it couldn't be seen. One of the guards was struck by a small pebble that might have broken off somewhere. When the bandits looked back at the rock, they saw their fort in flames. Had they been attacked, or had the fire formed for other reasons? In any case, realizing the situation, the bald man and the patched man rushed to the interior of the fortress to help their comrades. At the same time, when the passage was freed, the prisoners, not missing their opportunity, also rushed to escape from the fortress to the outside. They were able to successfully overcome the exit and head away from the burning camp of the mountain bandits. They quickly took their feet away without even looking back. Inside the fort, however, Chu was attacked from behind by some big, bald, and dark-skinned man wielding a dagger. He struck Chu with a powerful blow, but he managed to react in time to take the blow at least to some block. Chu slipped on the ground from the blow, but still managed to stay on his feet, helping himself with his hands to keep his balance. His own load flew further away. The attacker was blind in one eye, which was covered by a bandage. Baldy asked in anger who he was and where Chu had gotten him from. Chu decided to remain silent and not answer. At the same time, he was being taken in a ring by the bandits, limiting his room for maneuver. Bald asked Chu if he was alone, to which he at first warily replied that he was alone. But then, after a little thinking and picking up his nose, he said that he was alone enough against the likes of them. Baldy was a little impressed, so much fuss over just one guy. He obviously didn't buy Chu's bluff. Things were bad for Chu. This guy's punch had done a lot of damage considering the amount of damage and his condition. Things were really bad. Meanwhile, the bald man turned to his subordinates. The camp was still burning, but no one was in a hurry to extinguish it. After the motivational speech, the bandits rushed to put out the fire. The strongest ones stayed with Chu when the rest went to extinguish the fire. They weren't needed here anyway. Baldy decided to introduce himself, call him Sosan, and he was, as it is not hard to guess, the head of the fortress of the 9 dragons. Chu had no intention of introducing himself in return. Not offended by the refusal to introduce himself, Bald continued. He said that he likes people like Chu and would like him to join. After all, not everyone has the courage to sneak into a camp full of bandits. Baldy kept on and on persuading, yet his gang would not be badly strengthened with the entry of Chu. Chu also decided to stall for time, and sat down on the ground asking if he was offered to become a mountain bandit. Chu pretended to sit pensively wiping his chin, actually gathering spiritual energy. Baldy continued to talk about how difficult it was to find suitable people right now, and that Chu's courage should be rewarded. He was suggesting that the burning incident should be hushed up and get on the same level as his cronies. But Chu remained speechless. No matter what the bald man said to him, why would he even listen to him? He was just stalling for time. The big guy still couldn't stand the prolonged ignoring of his person, so he flared up as Chu replied that it sounded great. But getting up, he asked, since when did a wolf have to serve a mongrel? He recovered a little and wanted to provoke the bandits. Baldy went into a rage. Veins swelled on his face and a fierce grin crept over his face. Chu stood up and decided to further provoke the ringleader by offering a one-on-one fight, but he did not fall for this trick. Pointing his finger at Chu, he ordered his subordinates to tear him to pieces. The badass thugs rushed at Chu, not the least bit embarrassed by their numerical advantage. The patched-up thug made a swift attack on Chu. He used a spear, but Chu managed to duck into a deflection and let the attack pass over him. Not even a scratch was left on Chu's body, but his clothes were cut along with the bandages that were covering his face. Chu was already attacked by 3 people. One fought in hand-to-hand fighting with direct blows from which Chu shortened, another already known with a spear, and the third with a kistenu. When the bandages came off, the bandits were a little surprised at the sight of Chu, because he looked like an old man. The bandits began to provoke Chu, shouting all sorts of nasty things about his appearance, but Chu did not give in. He that unlike them looks like a man. The provocation worked, but only in the wrong direction. The bandits were getting angrier and angrier. Chu jumped away from another lunge from the dagger. Making a complex pirouette in the air, Chu counterattacked the enemy with his legs. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough to knock out the bandit. While Chu was in flight, a melee fighter attacked him, shouting something about pathetic tricks. It was funny to hear that from a bandit. But still, Chu missed a powerful blow to the torso and continued his flight no longer in the planned direction. Flying backwards, Chu managed to twist in the air, making a backflip and landing on his feet. Only after touching the ground, he was again attacked by the whole crowd without giving a second to breathe. Attacks fell on Chu one after another. He was spinning like a Yule, dodging everything that flew at him, but it cannot last long. Here is one of the punches' fist reached the face of Chu, sending him again in the air and knocking out of concentration. Chu flew well, even very well, but since he had no wings, the flight was followed by a landing. The bandits crowded around him like a pack of hyenas around a wounded lion. Chu Ying had underestimated what he was paying for now. How can he protect anyone when he is so weak? But Chu let go of the negative thoughts after all. But he saved those people. At least they'll be alive and safe. But Chu wasn't going to die in a place like this either. While Chu was trying to breathe, spoke one-eyed bandit. At first he thought that Chu brave, but as it turned out it was stupidity. Pointing at Chu, he ordered him to finish him off. Again, the dance with death. Chu, like a stream of water, escaped from the blows of the attacking bandits. The 8 drunken immortal steps technique was a great help to Chu and allowed him to avoid injury. But he was still far from his past form, still missing a couple of punches. Deciding to end it all with a single blow, Chu used the technique of light steps and rushed to the leader of the gang. Striking a whipping blow, he could only slightly hit him, scratching the throat of the enemy. Unnoticeably for the bandits, the battle shifted to the cliff, and when they wanted to attack Chu again, he did not hesitate to jump into the abyss. The last thing the bandits saw was Chu's hand, on which he squeezed all fingers, except the middle one in one famous gesture. One-Eyed was simply furious at this end of the battle. He did not like it at all, but there was nothing he could do. Chu continued to fall into the darkness of the abyss, promising himself to return here for their heads as soon as he was stronger naturally. The bandits looked down with slight bewilderment, and the one-eyed man ordered his subordinates to find the corpse of the attacker. He wanted to skin him to blow off steam. No sooner had the leader undressed all the instructions than one of the bandits came running from the side of the fort, reporting that there were only 3 burned bodies in the building with the prisoners. Baldy was already boiling like a kettle, so many problems because of one man. Even skinning him would not be enough, thought the bandit leader. Sosen ordered his subordinates to scour the area and find all the escaped prisoners, every last one of them. Chu kept falling down, twisting in the air first face down in order to break a little against the air. He grouped himself, entering the water with his feet. At first, Chu was afraid that he would crash to the bottom, for his speed was great, but he suddenly stopped. I don't know why. Having completely lost speed, Chu hovered under the water. As soon as he wanted to look around and find out the reason, he began to be pulled somewhere. But just a second later, the situation became clearer. He was stopped by streams of water that swirled into a whirlpool, which subsequently began to pull him further into the depths. The whirlpool that, for unknown reasons, formed under the water, continued to pull Chu to the bottom, taking him farther and farther into the impenetrable darkness of the water depths. Chu realized that if he does nothing, he will go to the bottom and will not be able to resurface, so he tried to group and equalize their position in relation to the bottom. Having caught the moment when he swam near the next ledge, he immediately pushed off from the solid support, overcoming the water flow and directing his body towards the surface. The push was powerful enough that the maelstrom could no longer hold him, especially since at this depth it was already beginning to lose its power. Chu began to surface, trying to make it before he ran out of air. He popped out of the water like a cork out of a champagne bottle, finally getting a chance to enjoy the air. Taking deep breaths, Chu tried to realize where he had gotten to. He lay on his back, supported by the expulsive force of the water. He needed to catch his breath and rest from the recent events from the battle to his underwater adventures. Opening his eyes, he decided to look back at the place where he had gotten to, or rather the place where the water had brought him. Tiredly, he looked around and studied his surroundings. Suddenly, his gaze was drawn to something interesting. Chu did not immediately believe what he saw. The spiritual energy began to react on its own. Couldn't it be? Chu began to quickly scan the space around him with spiritual energy, wanting to find what he felt, hoping he wasn't imagining it. Virgin ginseng. It was definitely him. Chu couldn't mistake it for anything, he was sure now. Rising out of the water, he began to look around more actively in search of the item he so desperately needed. Finally fully risen from the water and examined the cave in which he fell, Chu was surprised he fell from the waterfall. And then he was picked up by a stream of water. Is it really so far carried? And then Chu's gaze caught on something. His face expressed a look of surprise mixed with anticipation. His eyes were wide open. This is... A pristine ginseng tree was growing right on the rocky shore. A small sprout with one small inflorescence was peeking out from the ground. From the first, the plant did not stand out. Finally, Chu was literally crying with joy. He had a hard time finding this place. You could say blind luck had led him here. Remembering how the informant from the beggar clan claimed that it would be very easy to find it, Chu was angry and depressed. It was worth it to clarify the details. Getting out of the water, cursing that beggar, Chu directed his footsteps towards the precious plant that he had been longing to get all this time. Finally, the moment had come. Approaching tightly and kneeling down, Chu began to quickly dig up the precious root of the plant. After all, the whole essence of ginseng was there, not in the above-ground part. Having dug enough, he grasped the stem of the plant tightly and began to pull that out of the ground, being careful not to damage it. Chu was burning with impatience. The name was very appropriate for this plant. It looked like a baby. Chu was happy because he was able to get ahead of this cursed demonic servant. Now his plans are doomed to failure. Finished with the celebration of victory, Chu prepared to eat the ginseng root before thanking him for the treat. After all, it would not be polite to just eat it. Chu was engulfed by the sensation of the ginseng flavor. He was overwhelmed with a feeling of coolness, a bitter taste on the tip of his tongue, a sweet and refreshing taste, overflowing with spiritual energy. Finished savoring the taste, Chu began to literally push the root off of him. The spiritual energy was so dense, there was so much of it he was going to absorb it all. Finished, Chu sat down comfortably. Now he will show everyone what he is worth. That bald Sosan should already start to fear because soon Chu will come for his head. These pathetic bandits will no longer be able to stop him. Sitting in the lotus posture, he was busy absorbing and assimilating spiritual energy. Wait for the world, the useless guy from Huayan Prefecture, to return. Several people arrived at the small village where Chu was passing through. They were looking for someone. But it seems that the target of their search went by a different name, although she had clearly been here. Huang was one of the people who had come here in search of Chu. Huang's face looked battered, as if someone had beaten him up pretty badly. After learning from the tavern owner that a similar guy was here, but introduced himself as Jin. Rubbing his injured cheek, Huang wondered where his young master had gone. The tavern owner was a little perplexed by this visit, but did not ask any questions. The day Chu escaped, morning. Huang was lying on the floor, snoring all over the place. He was still reeling from the amount of alcohol and special poison that Chu had spiked him with. As a friend, the door suddenly opened, and in it showed a very disgruntled Father Chu, that with his loud shouting and appearance still managed to wake up Huang. Huang stared at him with a stupid, uncomprehending look. The alcoholic sleep was in no hurry to release him from its strong embrace. The string of saliva that dripped from his lips also gave him a silly look. But the saliva problem was solved by a strong kick from the evil Father Chu, which not only wiped away the saliva, but also the remnants of sleep from Huang's face. Father Chu was literally throwing lightning bolts in his rage. How dare that bastard Huang fall asleep? Threats came from him. Father Chu was going to bury Huang alive in the ground. Then he could sleep all he wanted. Huang still couldn't understand what was going on, and the others tried to stop the head of the family. And then Father Chu pointed to a large mountain of empty liquor bottles. Look how drunk he is, Father Chu continued to complain, and an understanding began to form in Huang's mind. He began to remember how he had sat and drank with the young master, or rather how Chu had systematically drunk Huang, encouraging him to drink to the bottom of one bowl after another at a truly terrible pace. Huang's vision was getting cloudier and cloudier with each drink, and the objects in front of his eyes were dancing in a drunken whirlpool of events. The last thing he remembered was his young master offering to get drunk. After that, consciousness sank into darkness, and Huang became horrified at the realization of the situation. Chu's father continued to rage, wanting to tear the man who had been defamed to look after his son and not get half drunk. The two men who were with him tried to calm him down and forgive him this time. But then Father Chu had no time to finish one of his many threats against Huang and collapsed in the arms of his attendants. The imperial healer was afraid for Mr. Wang. Laying him on the floor, the physician began to feel for a pulse on his wrist. After all, he was a physician and should know about such things and could provide help if needed. Suddenly his face turned pale and his eyes opened wide. In disbelief, he raised his gaze to the steely occupants of the room and announced with shock that Mr. Wang was dead. And at this moment, Father Chu came to his senses. He had just lost consciousness for a moment, but he wasn't dying. Only after coming to his senses did he start pounding that incomplete healer. Returning to Huang, that after he was well beaten was sent in search of the young master. He went to the courtyard in front of the tavern and noticed the boy that looked after the horses. One of them was strange, or rather its eyes. The boy was also surprised by the unusual eyes of the horse, and it does not eat everything. Even special food refuses to eat. He had to run through the neighboring villages in search of what this horse would eat. Huang headed for the stables. In the meantime, the boy poured a strange mixture of hay and various fruits into the feed trough that the horse at least ate somehow. Getting closer, Huang was able to identify the horse. It was one of the elite from their estate. Huang immediately ran, starting to call out to the young master as he mistook him for a boy from far away. When he got closer and realized that the young master was not here, Huang started running from side to side, panicking and asking himself why his young master had climbed into such a hole and where he had gone. He kept running around the yard looking for Chu but could not find anyone, his actions putting the boy in a stupor. It was not clear how to react to this. Huang was a very eccentric person. However, having noticed the boy, Huang ran up to him and with tears in his eyes began to ask him where the horse had come from and whether he had seen its owner. The boy, after some thought, said that the owner of the horse had gone to Pagoda Peak, just where there is a fortress of 9 dragons, mountain bandits. When asked not to go there, he only told them that he was looking for something. When Huang heard about the 9 bandits, he became even more hysterical. After all, they are bandits, and his young master is so gentle. Especially the master will twist off Huang's head if something happens to Chu. Having imagined the brigands and how they will first beat up and then take Chu captive, Huang fell into an even greater panic. Although it seemed where more? Huang was almost tearing his hair out of his chest with worry. Having heard enough, Huang snapped out of his seat like a professional sprinter right on the run, shouting something about his young master. He urgently needed to do something before it was too late. Leaving behind him the surprised boy and the clouds of dust that kicked up from under his feet, Huang ran in the only direction he knew. But he didn't even get 20 feet away before he stopped abruptly. Realizing something, Huang turned around and ran back to the boy to confirm the details. But luck, Huang apparently does not smile at all, permanently interrupted to that back. And that's why he did not run a little bit and clung to a small stone sticking out of the ground. Huang tried his hand at flying, and after a moment's thought he decided to crash land face down at the boy's feet. His fall raised a pile of dust. Having risen from the ground with a broken face and blood coming from the nose, Huang, however, was able to gather his thoughts and ask about the whereabouts of this Pai Pagoda. A group of people were running through the night forest. The first in the column was a woman carrying a small child in her arms. The people looked very frightened and seemed to be running away from someone. Suddenly, a male silhouette appeared behind one of the trees on their way, which was difficult to distinguish in the night darkness. The people were already afraid that they had been caught up, but it turned out to be the same man who showed Chu the way to the purple stone. Having indicated his peaceful intentions, he decided to show the fugitives a shortcut to the village. The woman who was wearing Chu's cloak briefly thanked the man and continued running. These were the very people he was able to rescue from the mountain bandit camp. The male guide asked the woman with the child if they had seen a guy in bandages who was supposed to be heading in their direction. The woman cast a tense glance at the man, but did not have time to answer. At the same time, there was a waterfall near the stream where Chu had fallen, and on one of the banks was an armed group of 7 men. These were the gang members who had been sent to find Chu. One of them was kicking the ground in frustration, reporting to the deputy leader that the corpse of that guy could just be carried away by the current, and they would not find him now. But they had no choice because then their boss would be furious, and when that happened, if they didn't find the corpse, they would be skinned, not him. The subordinates could only sigh sadly. The deputy began to give orders. He wanted to split into groups. 5 of them would go down the river and the rest would stay to search in the vicinity of the waterfall. The subordinates accepted the order and were ready to follow it. And then one of them began to point in the direction of the waterfall, attracting the influence of the deputy to the waterfall. After his shout, the eyes of those present turned to the waterfall. From the waterfall itself, behind which there was a hidden cave, a man came out. His face was hidden by the hair that stuck to his face. The man was complaining about fate, for if something had gone wrong, he would have drowned. The deputy was surprised to find a living person here. They shouldn't be here except for them. I wonder where he came from, the deputy hastened to ask. The man whose face was still hidden by his hair noticed that he was not alone, and was surprised that someone was there to greet him. It was unexpected, but pleasant, because Chu, and it was him, was only going to look for them. Who she was, the bandits were in a state of confusion. They didn't have a lead on this person. They were even looking for a corpse. So what this person was doing here was decidedly unclear to them. Tossing back the hair from his face, revealing his new face, which got rid of all the wrinkles, he only further discouraged the bandits. Chu asked if they were looking for him, and the bandits didn't understand why this strange guy was bothering them in the first place. He didn't yet understand why the bandits didn't recognize him, but he didn't care. Chu only ordered them to take off his clothes since he was freezing. The bandits immediately tensed up. They began to prepare for battle by raising their weapons and taking up positions. The deputy said that if they silently tolerated the fact that he was burning, it did not mean that they could talk nonsense. But Chu was deaf to their threats, only repeating his question, or should it be decided by badly using force? The bandit did not understand. What can one man do to them? Is he crazy? Without letting the bandit finish his thought, Chu sharply reduced the distance between them and delivered a sharp blow to the jaw with a leg. The bandit threw up in the air from the force of the blow. But this was not the end of Chu, and decided to add another kick to the bandit, this time striking from the top down, knocking the bandit into the rocky shore. This made the bandits shiver. Their main man was cut in just 2 blows in the blink of an eye, so they don't stand a chance. The unknown is too strong for them. Taking the cloak from the defeated bandit, Chu was upset that it was wet. He should have been more careful. What was the point of swapping one wet garment for another? The bandits shook even harder from this, grabbing onto their clothes as if wanting to protect them from the creepy clothes snatcher. It was as if they were trying to cover themselves, as if to say that there was nothing remarkable about their clothes. Chu smiled a shark smile and, flashing his golden eyes bloodthirsty, asked the bandits who next wants to share with him so necessary dry clothes. After his words, the clothes immediately flew off the bandits, literally flew into the air from the speed with which the bandits tore off their clothes. The bandits found themselves in a very embarrassing position. They were standing in the cold in their underwear, looking fearfully at the young man who was putting on their clothes. Chu also borrowed a weapon. It was a glaive. He tested its balance on his outstretched arm, twirling it from side to side. The weapon was a little heavier than he thought, but it didn't matter. Suddenly, Chu swung his glaive, aiming it at the naked bandits. They were shaking from the cold and the fear that had overtaken them. They didn't even realize what was happening. They stood there with stupid, frightened expressions, looking at their offender but unable to do anything to him. In an instant, the head of one of the bandits separated from the body from the blow that was struck by Chu. The bandits were horrified, because just now the head of their comrade in arms was blown off in one blow. The bandits shook more than before. Chu, interrupting in a lame mood, asked if everything is all right with the bandits. They will just stand there, will not even run. However, Chu didn't care. What did he care? They were all going to die anyway. The bandits began to beg him for mercy, but Chu did not want to, and he had already made a promise that he would kill every one of their gang. The bandits had already fully realized that they couldn't get out of here on their own feet. One of them, very nervous, still decided to ask Chu to whom he promised to kill them. Chu swung for another blow, calmly said that he promised himself. He was not going to pity them given what they did, and personal long to them he had. Here already the bandits could not stand it. Instincts took over, and they began to run away from Chu at all possible speed for them. Except that's not gonna help them. After complaining to himself about the troublesome bandits, Chu prepared to make a strike that would quickly end this whole farce, after which he could head to Sosen's place. Making away from the weapon in the hands of Chu went Wave that began to catch up with the bandits, and literally in an instant reached their backs. One blow and 5 heads rolled across the frozen rocky ground. One movement and the bandits that could previously cause Chu problems were killed easily and simply. Having finished with them, he crouched down, preparing to make a dash. Chu would not wait. It is time to hunt, hunting beasts, because these bandits are not worthy to be called humans, and soon Chu will correct the mistake of nature. Moving quickly between the groups of bandits that were supposed to be looking for him, Chu himself was looking for them. They were supposed to be hunting him, but he ended up hunting them. When he finished with the last one, Chu noticed that he had blood on him, but he had just changed his clothes. Again, his clothes are dirty. Well, where can he find new ones, thought Chu. There were no whole ones left nearby. He did not hesitate to attack, so... Deciding to at least wash the blood off his face, Chu came closer to the mountain river, which formed a small dam in this place. The water was calm, unlike other areas. Leaning over, he could not immediately believe his eyes. A young man was looking at him in the reflection. Whose beautiful face is that? The question ran through Chu's mind. After thinking for a moment, Chu realized that he had recently eaten virgin ginseng. Now it became clear to him why he did not recognize the bandits. His skin became so firm. Washing himself, Chu continued to complain about the former owner of the body. How could he ruin such a beautiful face? Still, he was lucky. Now he has a very beautiful appearance. Yes, and with such a face, no one would think that he could be adopted, especially when comparing his past with his sister. Now, however, there were common features in them. Chu was distracted from his narcissism by the screams that sounded from the forest that started not far from the river. Looking around, Chu was able to notice how the birds flew into the sky from the turmoil that was happening on the ground. He now had a rough idea of the location of the screamers. The man was being beaten by one of the bandits, striking him on the back with a whip and inflicting severe wounds. His piercing scream echoed through the winter forest. At the back stood the two captives already bound hand and foot by rope, while the black-haired bandit continued to beat the poor male guide with his whip. The bandit suspected the old man of conspiring with Chu because he had met a group of fugitives and tried to lead them out of the forest. The man was not guilty, but the bandit did not believe him, continuing to shower searing blows. As the bandit swung once more for another blow, the bandits noticed something. Even the bandit with the whip froze, staring in the direction of the unknown irritant. The bandits had confused Chu with the servants of Wu Tei, the deputy bald-headed gang leader. They wondered what he was doing here. They had to look for the corpse of the attacker. As soon as Chu realized that he was spotted, he squatted down and began to collect snow. The bandits did not understand what was happening. Why is he doing this? Did he come here to play? Why is he making snowballs? The bandits were lost in speculation, not understanding what this strange type was doing here. As soon as one of the bandits guessed to ask Chu what he was doing here, he managed to swing like a baseball player, preparing to throw. It didn't look like an attack, but then Chu threw a snowball, as if it was shot from a cannon, and the shell flew at high speed towards a group of bandits, or rather in one of them. The snowball hit exactly one of them. From the force of the snowball hit, the bandit flew back a few meters. If it didn't kill him, it knocked him out for a long time. The bandit with a whip could not realize the situation until the end, as in another of his subordinates flew the same projectile, did the same thing with his body, that is, causing severe injuries. Chu was pleased with the improvisation. After all, he knocked out 100 points out of 100 with his accurate and strong throws. Without waiting for further reaction from the remaining bandits, Chu rushed at them, lightning shortening the distance, coming within striking distance with his weapon. But instead of knocking out one of them, Chu jumped high up in front of the group of bandits. Sensing the trouble, they scattered to different sides. But it was too late. Chu was already flying down with his glaive. The landing was hard. Those who did not have time to run away were thrown back by the shockwave. The weakly injured bandits were struggling to get up from the ground, looking warily at their new acquaintance. Chu stood among the lying bodies of the bandits with his head proudly raised and his glaive heel on the ground. He was ready to continue. Swinging once more, Chu prepared to perform one of the techniques, slash the clouds and slash the moon. The instant attack mowed down almost all of the bandits, ignoring the distance between them. There was only one bandit left alive, but he was lying on the ground before he could get up, so the blow had passed over him without damaging him. But that didn't change anything. The bandit suffered the same fate as his comrades. Chu approached the last survivor and asked if he was scared, because just now it was the Wudan clan's moon destruction technique. Bandit couldn't figure out who this guy even was. Chu was a little upset that he wasn't recognized again. Chu heard moans and turned towards the one who was making them, briefly distracting himself from the last bandit. On the snow lay Chu's familiar uncle guide that helped him find his way to the bandit's fortress. He remembered him, so he was able to recognize him. Behind the man lying in the snow were bound men. Furious, Chu cast an angry glare at the bandit. The only thing he was interested in right now was who did it. Bandit, realizing that the matter smells fried, began to justify himself and brazenly lie about something that he did not even touch him with a finger, and in general he has no idea who did it. The ridiculous lies did not convince Chu for a second. He just made one swing of his weapon, launching a wave in the form of a blade that flew into the bandit at high speed. The bandit did not even immediately realize what had happened, but in any case it was already too late. The bandit had nothing to think with, although he had not really used his head in life. Having finished with the bandits, Chu went to the uncle of the guide who was lying in the snow covered in blood. The captives were afraid of him at first, but he hastened to assure them that he would not touch them. Approaching the man, Chu inquired about his condition. The old man opened his eyes and first saw a guy with a straw hat and the lower part of his face covered, whose eyes glittered gold. But it was only an obsession from weakness. Chu was actually looming over the old man in an already new guise. He told the man that he had asked him to return to the ancient so that such a thing would not happen. The old man tried to answer something, but he was too weak. Chu couldn't leave this man to die, and so he tried to let some energy flow through the man's veins and heal him. Even though it wasn't a full-fledged cure, the man should be on the mend. After giving the first aid and noticing that the man's breathing had evened out and his wounds had stopped bleeding, Chu turned his attention to the rest of the captives. He wanted someone to carry him to the village, where he could be properly treated while he should finish his business here in the bandit camp. He instructed the men to walk from here without looking back, moving slowly and carefully towards the exit of the forest. The men listened to the advice and began to pack up and leave. Chu decided that it was worth improving his weapon a bit, to make it more familiar. After all, he was more of a swordsman, and he didn't use arrow weapons very often. So he broke off the shaft of the glaive closer to the blade. Chu was calm because he knew that people would not be chased. He would take care of it. He was going to unleash the fury of the gods upon these beasts. Raising his sword to the heavens, in it struck lightning, as if confirming the seriousness of his intentions. At the same time, 2 guards were standing at the entrance of the bandits' fortress that they had seen the lightning near their lair. Strange, where could lightning come from in the middle of winter? But for a long time he could not be surprised. Right in front of the entrance formed a veil of snow raised in the air. The bandits prepared for battle. But before they could even blink, a man jumped out from behind the snow curtain, and with his first blow he neutralized one of them for good. But the second bandit did not outlive his colleague for long. Their deaths were literally separated by a fraction of an instant. Here he had already taken out 2 of them. There were still many more left. With no intention of hiding, Chu decided to call all the fire on himself and deal with them all in one fell swoop, so as not to chase them all over the lair. Standing behind the passageway, he shouted the name of the head of the local gang loudly. Spiritual energy filled Ah from head to toe. It was like he was a different person now. Although if you asked any of the gangsters, they would definitely say it was a different person. Chu wasn't going to cause any more trouble. He decided to end it all in one fell swoop. The bandit who had attacked him was chopped in half without even paying attention. Chu's eyes blazed with determination and something even more mystical and incomprehensible. He had clearly decided that he was going to kill all of these bandits tonight. No one would get away. Moving quickly between the bandits, Chu chopped those into cabbages without any resistance, quickly moving forward. The back rows of bandits began to shake with fear. They did not expect such power from the enemy. Most ceased to be a threat to Chu as they shook with fear. But just in time, an arrow flew past him that could have hit his head, but instead hit the bandit behind Chu's back. Chu began to move from side to side gradually, shortening the distance between himself and the archer. No arrow could hit him. Standing in the company of the 3 archers was the bald-headed boss of the local attack cell. He was dissatisfied with his subordinates because they could not eliminate the intruder and lay down in packs. Chu found himself surrounded just like just a day earlier, but something had changed. Namely, Chu himself had changed. Now such a situation was not dangerous for him. Finally, Chu found the one-eyed man, because he was wondering where he had gone while his subordinates were dying like flies. The situation had turned in Chu's favor since the last night. Chu continued to provoke the bald ringleader, saying that it looked like he had chickened out and brought in the regular hunters. Chu felt he had an undeniable advantage, despite the numerical advantage. But the fact that there were so many of them would only delay the inevitable, so he shouldn't have done it. Chu raised his sword and prepared to attack. The bandits were frightened. They clutched their weapons tighter and drew their bows more tightly. But they could not prevent their doom. Resistance was pointless. As soon as Chu swung and prepared to rush into the attack from the direction of the entrance to the fortress, voices were heard. Someone had arrived to raid the mountain hunters. Chu turned his head to the place of the entrance and was able to see how from there came a slender row of warriors that had already bared their weapons and rushed to attack. At the head of this group ran Huang. The warriors brought by Hang and the bandits faced off in battle. They all had only one order to kill all the bandits, which they successfully did. The warriors who came were clearly more skillful than the ordinary mountain bandits, so the battle was going in their favor. They were systematically clearing the bandit camp. Huang also participated in the battle, hitting one enemy after another. He was also able to recognize the skills of the young warrior who had arrived here before them and was already fighting the bandits. Chu only sighed heavily. He thought to figure it out on his own. The one-eyed leader was panicking and giving orders to stop the intruders at any cost. Chu noted the ringleader among the crowd of his bandits. Sosen was his main target, so there was no point in splitting the difference, especially now that the allied forces had arrived. Baldy, sensing that they couldn't win this battle without being seen, decided to run away, only to be seen by Chu. He was not going to let him go and followed him. The ringleader ran, not breaking the path, but he had no chance from the beginning. He was expected to be a coward. Still, he never fought. But the bald man didn't manage to escape far, having only managed to reach the fort's leaning fence where Chu caught up with him. The bandit had no reason to run. He already had one foot in the grave. He just doesn't know it yet. He couldn't understand why the strange guy was following him. He didn't recognize Chu either. But Chu in kindness decided to help his friend to remember himself. Smiling radiantly, he demonstrated between folk gesture, the same when jumped into the abyss. The leader was as if scalded with boiling water, very frightened and disoriented. He could not understand how he survived and what happened to his face. Chu still decided to explain that everything is thanks to mystical plants, however. The ringleader will still not understand anything. It was time to finish. Chu began to slowly approach the leader. He was cowardly, but his head was thinking. He quickly guessed that before him is a master of martial arts. He was to him a small piece of work. Realizing his position, Bald collapsed to his knees, realizing the futility of the battle, and began to beg Chu for mercy. Chu, this situation seemed funny rather than Bald realized his place. The ringleader began pelting Chu with promises, riches, women, anything he could wish for, just to gently spare him. He was cut short by Chu's cold voice, demanding he shut up. Did the bald man spare anyone who asked him to? No. He robbed the common people, kidnapped children and women, abused them. Was there anything that could have stopped his evil? There's no forgiveness. Baldy sat on his knees, realizing the situation he was in. He would not survive. There would be no mercy and there was nothing he could do, just like his victims before him. Raising his sword upwards, Chu was passing judgment on behalf of the heavens for all the bald man's atrocities. All Tom had to do was accept it with honor. Though how could his kind have honor? The ringleader only had time for one last shriek before his head separated from his torso. Revenge was done. Justice was done. Chu felt a little sorry that the man who had caused so much grief had gotten off so lightly. But by then, Huang had already arrived. He obviously didn't recognize Chu, so he came closer and asked if he was okay. It seemed to Huang that the young warrior in front of him was very angry at the leader of this gang of bandits. So young and so ruthless, said Huang. Chu was about to greet Huang, but he interrupted him half a word. Without letting Chu say that he was him, Huang began to ask questions. Huang looked for a young lord about the same age as the unknown warrior in front of him. A lot of goofiness and stubbornness, arrogant and not at all heard of manners. A smile descended from Chu's face with every word. Chu was already thinking about where to bury this impudent, while Huang kept saying that he eats like a cow, and a rude one more. But when it came to Huang, who he was talking to, he abruptly changed the direction of the dialogue, saying that Chu had become the standard of beauty, and of course he recognized him at once. Chu boiled more and more words. Huang did not make it better from the word at all. He could not believe his ears. That is what Huang says about him to the first person he meets. But their dialogue was interrupted by warriors that just came closer. They praised Chu's abilities, though his style was a bit rough, but there was no point in scolding him for it. Huang decided to do what he came here for after all, and he also brought the head of the heavenly squad with him. Father Chu was worried about him and wanted him to come back. Huang was in a difficult position because of the head's character. It was bad timing. Chu had yet to kill the demon servant, but it looked like Huang wasn't going to leave without him, deciding to remember the times when he was an inspector and caught criminals. Huang slowly walked towards Chu with the rope. Chu broke the distance when he sensed something wrong. He immediately warned Huang that he would not hold back in case of trouble. Huang smiled radiantly, a smile that creeped Chu out. Somehow one didn't want to mess with someone who had such a smile. Quickly realizing the smell of the matter, Chu rushed to escape. He definitely did not need this. His business here is still unfinished, but Huang has already prepared to capture the target. Huang unwrapped the rope and threw it at the fleeing Chu. Huang did not eat his bread for nothing when he was an inspector. The rope, like magic, wrapped around the leg of the fleeing Chu, ensuring that he could not go any farther. But Chu's not as easy as he looks. Huang decided to remind Chu that in the past, he was an inspector of the Central Intelligence, and they are not recruited by advertisement. Huang sharply pulled the rope that was wrapped around Chu's leg. He hoped to knock him down, and then pull him up like a fish on a fishing trip. But losing today was not in Chu's plans. Chu did not even think to resist. On the contrary, he accelerated towards Huang, wanting to use the gained inertia to strengthen the blow. He warned me he wouldn't hold back. His fist collided with Huang's open palm, and he successfully blocked the blow. The warriors who had come with Huang were amazed that the young master had reached such heights that he could fight on a par with the man who had once been nicknamed the Fighter. In fact, Chu even surpassed Huang by throwing an incredible number of punches, slowly pushing through his defenses, with each blow bringing Huang's defeat closer. Suddenly, instead of another blow, Chu made a rapid dash approaching close to the undeceased Huang. A quick kick to Huang's body from Chu caused him to lose his balance and almost toppled him to the ground. Chu thought to build on his success, but was prevented from doing so. Chu felt someone coming up from behind. He jumped away from Huang and prepared to attack the new opponent. But instead of attacking, he had to go on the defense. After all, these are no longer talentless bandits, but trained warriors, especially since there are more of them. Chu will have a hard time winning this battle. One of the soldiers threw at him a shard of board that was left after the bandit camp had been trashed. The soldier said he was sorry, and it was just an order, but you couldn't tell by his face. Chu looked around at the situation, with Huang on one side and the 3 warriors that arrived with him on the other. A difficult situation for him, but Chu is willing to go all the way. This balance of power was clearly not in favor of Chu. He, taking advantage of the moment, decided to remove the rope from his leg, which could prevent further battle. Huang took a stand and prepared to continue the battle. He was committed to his goal and was going to get the young master home one way or another. Spiritual power began to concentrate around him. Chu, having dealt with the rope, also began to prepare for a serious and difficult battle, concentrating the energy around him, ready to attack at any moment. One of the warriors who had previously thrown a stick at Chu also began to concentrate energy, preparing in turn to strike and disarm Chu. Still, no one was going to kill anyone here. Chu was in accordance with strong warriors around him, and he had not yet recovered his abilities enough to deal with them without straining. As suddenly the tension of the battle was broken by an old man guide who was leaning on the shoulder of an unknown man walking towards Chu. The gazes of all present crossed on the newcomer. When he reached Chu, the old man bowed deeply to him, showing respect and gratitude. He was very concerned about this matter, and he would not forgive himself if he did not do so. Chu was embarrassed, for he had not done anything special, but the man who turned out to be the old man's son hastened to assure him that saving a life was not nothing. If it wasn't for Chu, this old man would have really died. His gratitude to Chu was genuine. He was completely embarrassed and couldn't find the right words to respond in any way. Satyricus said that he really wanted to thank him, so he mustered up the courage to follow the celestial squad. All the more, everyone who had been rescued from captivity by Chu was also very grateful to him. They had managed to escape successfully after all, and by defeating the gang of 9 dragons, Chu saved the lives of hundreds of people, not only the hostages, but also their families, and those who might be caught by the bandits in the future. Having said all he wanted, the old man said goodbye and left with his son, while Chu stood pensive and reasoned that still, he spent too much spiritual energy. He did not notice how a rope was thrown over him, which began to entangle his body. A horse-drawn wagon and 5 horsemen were riding along the road, returning from a successful mission to find a young gentleman. The bound Chu was inside the wagon trying to shout to Huang. He has the peace and tranquility of Marim in his hands. How could Huang not realize this? Huang agreed with everything that was said, as if he were talking to a child or a mentally ill person. But he had orders to bring Chu home. And all assurances of seriousness from Chu, he simply ignored. Chu's plan went awry. He was going to avoid Huang before the Chaos Servant showed up. But now he was caught right in his hands, and with each passing second he was getting farther away from his goal. Huang only looked condescendingly at his young master, advising him to rest properly while he took care of the rest. Huang casually extended his hand towards Chu. The latter didn't even notice the catch as Huang touched his head with the palm of his hand, plunging him into sleep with the help of the technique and cutting Chu off half a word. Chu continued to mumble something inarticulately, began to fall on his back asleep with a special spiritual technique. And now the consciousness has completely left Chu. One of the accompanying warriors was surprised that a young gentleman with such a childish face had enough strength to defeat a gang of mountain bandits alone. Huang, on the other hand, asked that the report not mention that Chu had played a key role in defeating the 9 dragons. Fame in Merimee is hard to obtain, but the more fame, the more trouble on the head of the one who is famous. Huang indeed treasured his young master. He did not wish such a fate for him. Unfortunately, he did not know what actually awaited Chu in the future. Conditioned to say that the mountain bandits were dealt with by Jin, it was a fake name that Chu had used on his journey. Thus, the public's attention would not be directed to him. Chu did not hear all this conversation. He was in the realm of sleep, lying in the measured swaying wagon that took him home. At the same time, in the cave under the waterfall, where Chu dug up ginseng, there were several people. They were too late and could only find a hole in the ground where the plant had recently been. The servant of chaos collapsed to his knees looking at the blasted earth. His attendants were disturbed by this behavior of their master. They were already trying to approach him. The servants were interrupted by their master's voice. The virgin ginseng that was meant for their young master disappeared. A dark aura began to thicken around the white-haired man. A wave of anger washed over the man, and the dark aura grew denser and denser, disturbing the servants with a heavy atmosphere. Silence reigned in the cave. As a friend, the white-haired man completely stopped controlling his anger, and it began to seep out, pressurizing the people gathered there. The servants took a step back. They suddenly began to gasp, clutching at their throats as if trying to remove the invisible grip that began to choke them with a steel vice. One by one, they began to collapse to the floor. With a great effort, one of the servants managed to call out the head of their organization. At this rate, he would just kill them. With each passing moment, the pressure grew, bringing the death of his subordinates closer. But suddenly, the head of the organization calmed down, the pressure disappeared, and there was no more reminder of what had happened here a second ago. The dark aura dissipated, returning the cave to its former appearance. The servant was able to breathe calmly with a full chest. Now that the pressure was gone, the danger was over. Gathering his thoughts, the head called out to one of his apprentices, who immediately responded readily to his head. Slowly rising to his feet, the head said the obvious thing: "A thief has been here." Ginseng was missing. He needed to return to the Golden Palace and help the young master. He assigned his servant to search for the unknown thief. He had to find him, return the ginseng at any cost, even if he had to cut his stomach open, and then to beat all his relatives, friends, and relatives of friends. Chu sat in the cart and gave in to despondency. He had a chance to kill the servant of chaos right there at the place where the ginseng was growing. But now the moment was gone. He would have been able to live the rest of his life in prosperity and without worrying about anything. But the cursed Huang had spoiled it all, and now he would have to suffer in pursuit of his goal. Huang informed Chu that they were almost there, and also a letter from his father that he could not wait any longer and poison them to meet. All of Chu's complaints he simply ignored. In the end, the moment is gone and there is no point in going back. At least Chu's plan worked halfway. He was able to lead the ginseng from under their noses. They were approaching the capital of the prefecture, Hefei City. The long journey by wagon was almost over. Chu had only seen training halls since the arrival of chaos, so something like this was new to him. It was a large city with a water canal running through the entire city, right through the center of it. The city was beautiful and well-maintained. This was the first time Chu had seen such a thing. Peaceful streets where people were quietly trading. They went from counter to counter and bought things that they would like. Street actors gave performances for all comers. Having finally arrived at their destination, Huang decided to untie Chu on the condition that he would not run away. Chu's body was stiff. It seemed that just a little more and he would just die in that cramped carriage. Chu stood in front of the imperial gate looking at the architecture. It all clearly matched the confidence level of the Namgung family. Already going to pass through the gate, Chu was stopped by the gatekeeper who blocked his way with a sword. A familiar situation for Chu. But this time everything was bypassed. In the courtyard appeared Chu's father that gave the order to let the arrivals inside. Seeing his father, he had a smile on his face. What a loving man. All the worries about his son directly written on his face. Chu decided that at least this time will portray himself as an exemplary son. Spreading his arms wide, he wanted to hug his father, as he, with a red face of anger, passed Miam in the direction of Huang. Huang pounced on Huang and began to ask where he had taken Chu, as he had said in his letter that they were going together. Did Huang really think he was fooling him? Chu's father's anger did not subside, but Huang still managed to squeeze out the words, pointing at Chu with his hand. Looking back at Chu, he did not recognize him and continued to shake Huang by the chest. How dare he mock him, because this puny and smarmy robber cannot be his son. Chu decided to correct the situation. Turning to his father and denoting his kinship with him, Huang still spoke the truth. He looked at Chu with wide-open eyes and could not believe whether it was really his son. Having shaken out their Huang's whole soul, he let him go after all. Chu smiled at him affably, and his father still could not believe that the man before him was his son. Could it really be his son? Coming closer, all Chu's father could say was to ask why. Oh, these people, his son comes back from a trip and here he comes. Deep night, Namgung Manor. The full moon was shining in the sky, its silver disk illuminating the night beauty of the city, giving it some mystery. Inside the house, in one of the rooms, 3 people were dialoguing. One of those warriors was giving an account of the events that had happened. He said that according to the original version, it was all the work of a man named Jin. But in reality, young Mr. Chu had dealt with all the bandits alone. One of the men with the distinct traits of the Namgung clan was surprised, tackled a horde of bandits single-handedly, but the information was verified. The man still couldn't believe it. Perhaps the warriors were mistaken. But no, it was really so, even more. When they tried to detain him, Chu successfully resisted that they were barely given to capture him. The younger man tried to object, blaming it on the negligence of the head of the Celestial Squad and Huang's bodyguard, stating that he would not believe such nonsense. But the head of the Celestial Squad disagreed. They had let all but lethal techniques be used to capture the young lord, but the man still refused to believe. The elder Namgung began to press his son's shallowness, that he had missed such a talented young man, that he had grown all the more handsome since he had lost weight. How then to call a man who believes some rumors and now denies obvious facts? The man stood up from the table, determined to settle the question of marriage himself, and forbade his son to meddle in the matter in any way. The next day, 3 people were gathered around the table: Chu, his father, and the elder Namgung. The elders were talking over a bowl of hot drink. Chu sat and in his thoughts resented the situation, not only that these people drink early in the morning, but also for some reason strain him. But then his thoughts were interrupted by his father's offer to take the state exam. Chu did not have the slightest desire to take on unnecessary obligations. He still had a world to save. Suddenly, Namgung decided to make a proposal, drawing attention to himself. He began to say that military service will only ruin Chu's talent, where he can become at most a general. There is not the same training. Chu didn't know what this grandpa was getting at, but he was already liking it. Chu's father listened attentively to his speech. In the end, he offered to find Chu an outstanding teacher, which would allow him to develop his skills to unprecedented heights and go down in history as the savior of the state. The last words impressed Chu's father very much. He always wanted the best for his son, perhaps even too much. However, Father Chu could not understand where they could find such a teacher. But as it turned out to look for no one and no need, because such a teacher is just in front of them. Namgung Chan, the King of Swords and past head of the Namgung clan. Such a person would definitely be able to cut down Chu's talent according to his own beliefs. At least Chan believed that. Chu sat and listened with a satisfied look. Surely a martial arts genius that could single-handedly defeat mountain brigands would be an enviable apprentice for any master. Chu thought about his possible apprenticeship. Still, unlike the 9 schools, they make a good impression. The Namgung family, one of the most illustrious families. Chu thought about the fact that with the name Namgung Kalan, he will be able to achieve a lot in the world of Marima, and there will be an opportunity to distance himself from the Yu family. Chu only has to convince his father of this. But as it turned out, he was glad that Chan was ready to become a teacher for his son. He literally radiated happiness and gratitude. The two agreed without any trouble. They had even managed to share the kinship over Chu. Yes, so much so that Chan recognized Chu as his son. Chu's father said that he was worried when he became aware of the worries on the emperor's soul. But now that Chang agreed to look after Chu, he was much easier and happier. Chang reasoned that the emperor's anxiety must have something to do with what he thought about the future of the throne. In that case, the emperor wishes Wang to be near his heir, for the latter is a scholar and can teach the future emperor much. Still, the emperor has great confidence in him. It was time for Chu's father to go back, and already sitting in the carriage, he admonished his son to obey his uncle and do his best in training. Chu's father went on and on admonishing him. The whole situation was turning into a kind of farce. But now the carriage moved and Chu's torment seemed to be over. As out of the map looked out, his father and Huang continued to wave to him as the carriage moved away. Chu was already anxious for them to leave. He felt very uncomfortable. Still, it was nice for Chu to feel such love and attention for himself. It was something he had been deprived of in his first life. Uncle Chu suddenly turned to him and told him to follow him, walking forward showing him the way. Chu couldn't understand if the training would start like this right away. Only he had time to say goodbye to his father. They moved through the clan territory together. All the people they met bowed and smiled at Mr. Chan. They were obviously happy to see him. Chu was interested in seeing his former head in this way. After a while, they began to approach a staircase that led somewhere upwards. The staircase was guarded by 2 guards that stood on the edges. But when they saw Chan, they did not even think to stop them. They climbed the wall. The wall was quite high, and from it there was a beautiful view of the picturesque surroundings. Upon reaching the roof above one section of the wall, Chan simply walked on air, which was expected of a current sword king, the footsteps of the Great Void. Not even his past teacher possessed footsteps of this level. Standing on the roof, Chan stared at Chu, urging him to climb up after him. Chu thought about it. He couldn't use some techniques right now, as there would be a lot of unnecessary questions. So Chu just decided to jump onto the roof. Crouching down and storing energy in his legs, he prepared to jump. It was quite easy, and there would be no unnecessary questions. Chu was able to jump onto the roof without any problems, standing next to his Uncle Chan. All that remained was to understand why they had come here. Chan, on the other hand, didn't skimp on complimenting his ability to handle his body. As they approached the edge of the roof that was facing the opposite direction to the city, they both froze and Chan started a dialogue. He asked how many places Chan had visited, according to Chu. Chu tensed up. Was this really a vigilance test? He was too relaxed, but Chang continued. He said he had visited only 64 places, and they all belonged to the Namgung family. The words Namgung family caught Chu's attention, but he couldn't understand. At the same time, Chang continued, asking him to look in the direction indicated. His finger pointed at a building that was visible in the distance. It was a gazebo on a hillside. Chan then swept his finger from place to place, as if drawing a boundary invisible to the eye, delineating the territory that he wanted to show. Everything Chu saw appeared to be the property of the Namgung family. It turned out to be quite a lot. His family covered a large area of territory. The city that was below them was very beautiful in the rays of the setting sun. Chu couldn't understand what Chan was getting at. He continued to marvel at the vastness of his family's domain, as if implying something. Chu had a false sense of anxiety. Chan asked Chu what he thought of what he saw in front of him. Chu didn't understand at all what this old man was getting at. Was this some kind of test or something else? Chu wondered, does Chang really want him to run back and forth? Some sort of demonstration of his skills at moving, a demonstration of speed, Chu tried to guess. What a troublesome old man, thought Chu, already preparing for the dash, to drop out just to prove the strength of his abilities. Crouching down for a low start, Chu began to infuse his legs with spiritual energy. But he was interrupted by Chan's voice that spoke of the beauty and richness of these places. From this, Chu stumbled. His foot slipped, throwing off his balance, and he fell shamefully with a swing, hitting his head. Chu decided to recognize the inadequacy of his mental abilities and turned to Chan for clarification. He had completely lost the meaning of this conversation. Chang smiled kindly and looked at Chu and told him that he was leading to the possibility that some of this land might become his. Chu was very surprised at such words. This land could belong to him. He thought they had come here for training, not for a geography lesson on Kailan Namgung. Chang continued smiling, said that there is nothing to be surprised about because once Chu marries Hai, he will give some of it all as a dowry. A very tempting offer, Chan thought. Chu was shocked to hear this. Did he really come here just for this conversation? Chan only confirmed that they were here just for that. Chu was speechless. After all, what did he expect from a man who was trying his best to seduce him and marry him off to his granddaughter? Chan thought that Chu's hesitation was due to the fact that Hai herself wouldn't want to marry him, going on to say that he could convince her and Chu shouldn't worry. Not wanting to listen to him anymore, Chu walked to the edge of the roof and jumped down. What nonsense, he thought, not intending to have a family anytime soon. Chu managed to land softly on the ground using his spiritual power to absorb the speed of the fall and not break something. And Chu rushed to run away from Chan in this conversation. He didn't need all of this. What he needed was to become stronger, and family life would not give him that. But Chan wasn't going to let him go so easily and rushed after him. Chu was fast, but Chan was still faster. Convinced that he had offered too little, he began to persuade Chu on the run, promising him a great deal. Realizing there was no point in running, Chu stopped, determined to clear up any loose ends. Chu was not going to get married despite all the riches promised to him. Chu began to make arguments for Chan, who did not understand him. He is the son of the Yu family, who already owns a lot of territory, as well as they are favored by the emperor himself, and the merchants are willing to do almost anything for them. Thus there was no point in Chu marrying for the sake of property. Finished with the conversation, Chu made it clear that Chan should forget about the wedding. He generally expected the latter to teach him martial arts, not to propose a wedding. But Chan did not give up. Who not he, who has achieved everything with his sword, can overcome any obstacles? He did not take into account that Chu was already born with a golden spoon in his mouth, so to offer him silver makes no sense. Chang was doing a set of blows from one technique, trying to impress Chu. His movements were smooth, but at the same time sharp. Chu, on the other hand, was not pleased that he was doing something he didn't understand early in the morning. Do all old people really get up so early? Chu pondered. Finished with the demonstration, Chan asked Chu how he liked what he saw. It was the art of the royal sword, something that would have impressed anyone but not Chu. Seeing Chu Chang's unimpressed face, Chu Chang decided to show him something else. He threw his sword. It was a sword technique of curbing energy. The sword obeyed its master's will and began to slice through the trees that were in the department's training ground. Chu only cared that such trees were probably expensive. Breathing heavily, Chang tried to regain his breath and asked if Chu was impressed this time. These battle drills are only betrayed to direct descendants. Chan promised Chu if he married Hai, he could have all his knowledge. While he was talking, Chu was gone. He wasn't going to hear about the wedding again. Chan was already desperate. He was offering knowledge that only direct descendants possess. It was impossible to learn even for money. But Chu was deaf to his entreaties. Chan decided to offer Chu to learn something of the Namgung family's martial arts. But to Chu's eyes, there was nothing of the sort in them. Hearing this, Chan laughed loudly. Chang thought that although Chu was talented, he had only recently begun to learn martial arts, and that he was simply not seeing the whole picture of what was going on, not realizing the true power of his art. Chu offered to demonstrate that he had no trouble demonstrating what he saw today. If Chu shows that he doesn't need it, maybe then Chan will let him go. He picked up a stick from the floor, intending to use it as a sword. Chu had learned enough of the art of Namgung to be beaten with it. Chu began to swing the twig as if trying to remember how Chan did it, only to be puzzled by it. But then Chu became more serious and began to repeat one by one what he showed Chan. Without making a single mistake, he was able to perform the art of the royal sword, causing Chan's amazement. But then Chan abruptly stopped Chu. He was angry because Chu could not learn this style. Then how does he know it? It bothered him a lot. But Chu, with an innocent face, assured that it was Chan himself who taught him. It was as if he was struck by lightning. He was actually showing Chu this technique. Chan was amazed. Chu had only had to take one look to learn the art of the royal sword. He had clearly underestimated Chu, that heaven-sent genius. Chan hovered immersed in his thoughts, thinking that Chu was a genius like no other. Chu tried to call out to Chan, but he continued to stand there without even blinking. Chu was fed up with just standing there and decided to leave. Throwing away the stick, he went on with his business. Now he won't have to marry anyone. Chung has the idea to marry Hai. This guy is worth the effort. Cheng must get him by any means necessary. At the same time, 3 men in wide straw hats arrived in the city. They were the servants of chaos who had missed the ginseng and were now looking for the thief. Going closer to the center of town, they decided to split up and continue their search one by one to expand their reach. They followed Chu's path by bribing the tavern owner where he was staying. They were able to find out that the thief's name was Jin, but didn't realize that it was a fake name that Chu had used. The boy stood in front of the manor looking for his Uncle Chu. He still hadn't shown up at the training ground for some reason. Chu walked out of the building and turned his attention to his nephew. He was calling out to him for a training session he was supposed to do. But Chu wasn't interested, so he decided to send the kid to practice on his own. But the kid was persistent. Before, Chu would have been frightened by that look, but now his teacher was in a way even nice. The guy was starting to boil over. He didn't like Chu at all, even though he had heard from his uncle that he was incredibly talented. So what if Chu was able to replicate a technique he had only seen once? Looking at the yawning Chu, he kept thinking that a true master was not only outstanding physical data, but also diligent training of inner strength. The guy couldn't feel Chu's windy energy, and Chu himself was fed up with standing there and went back to the house. He wanted to continue his rest. The guy is totally pissed off. He's been talking nice so far, so his esteemed uncle should go after him. Chu's past teacher dug his own grave with his own hands. Chu will be able to get even on him. And then Chu had a great idea. Maybe they could switch places and he could educate a student. An evil smile crept onto Chu's lips. Chu decided to explain that he couldn't teach him anything new, so he was the one who was going to teach him. The guy is completely pissed off now. He calls Chu uncle and has manners, but where does Chu get so much arrogance from? Chu was amused by this situation. Guy decided to beat Chu and drag him to practice by force, in which he could only wish him luck, which Chu did by calling him nephew. The guy was totally pissed off by the way Chu addressed him. Although Chu didn't show it, he just called his nephew a prisoner. So what's the big deal? The guy went off the roof. He began to shout at Chu, accusing him of unprecedented impudence, shamelessness, which is so huge that can pierce the heavens. Chu was in a daze after he actively provoked him. All he heard was the words about impudence. For something like that, a stronger word could have been called. Looking at the bent face of the guy, Chu thought that he just swallowed his provocation, although he could barely hold back. Perhaps he should have continued and finally pissed him off. Chu decided to push on. His nephew had already switched to non-formal communication. Chu noticed this and spit under his feet, causing another tirade about insolence. The guy was shaking with anger but did not know what to do. No one had ever insulted him, and he had never swore. So what to do in such a situation, he had no idea. Chu remembered how Song swore every day when he was teaching him, coming up with more and more insults towards Chu. So Chu thought he was used to scolding since he was still in diapers. No one could defeat Song on swords, so he still got the nickname of the Sword King of the 7 senses. There are 7 senses, 7 emotions in every human being. Sun was the man who brought them together and formed a martial art. Perhaps that was the reason why he used to beat Chu in the mornings when he was in a bad mood. And after a good lunch, Chu would receive a beating from a laughing Sung because of his good mood. When it rained and Sung was sad, he was Chu because he was sad. It was very difficult for Chu, because try to adjust to the character of a person whose mood changes 12 times a day. And what now? Now Chu saw in front of him a cultural lord, that of all forces restrains his emotions. And after all, he rose to the top by elevating his emotions to the absolute. Chu didn't want one of Marima's characters to disappear, but he couldn't just fix the situation. Now he would have to change Sun's character. Chu had a hard job ahead of him, but he was not saddened by it. On the contrary, a frightening smile and a creepy expression on his face was his answer to the difficulties. Sleep did not understand what Chu was burning about, but Chu decided not to explain everything unnecessarily. Now he would beat him, and he would have to understand everything himself. Chu jerked closer to the guy. Sung recognized this movement, the footsteps of the heavenly wind. How dare a pathetic wannabe be so insolent? Sung decided to show what was authentic and what was fake. Sun threw a whole bunch of punches at Chu, attacking without respite, but Chu had no problem dodging all of his blows. It was time for Chu to strike. Pirouetting in the air, Chu attacked him with his foot so that Sung was thrown off. But Sung was able to block Chu's hilarious punch, avoiding serious damage. At the same time, Chu continued to taunt him, criticizing his defense. Chu continued his assault on Sung. He reduced the distance in one dash and prepared to attack again. Sung concentrated, infusing his puka with spiritual energy and prepared to counterattack and force Chu to retreat. As Sung suddenly sensed something wrong, Chu decided to strike with spiritual energy as well, gathering it in his fist. He was bearing down on Sung and was already ready to strike, the distance between them rapidly decreasing, a wide smile on Chu's face. Sung recognized this strike. It was the way he had once attacked Chu. The block and the punch collided. The clash of spiritual power had begun. Sung held on with all his might, but Chu's pressure was too strong. He wouldn't be able to hold this punch. After another moment, Chu's fist pushed back Sung's defense and went straight for his face. Sung was amazed at how Chu played the fight, took advantage of his mistake, and immediately went into a crushing attack. Chu's fist reached Sung's face. The essence of the technique was that there was a burst of energy as it reached the target, increasing the strength of the strike, just like Namgung's fist technique. Thunderous explosion. A powerful explosion of energy swept through Sona's theme like the blast wave from a real explosion. A rumbling sound like thunder rumbled in all directions. Sun's body steamed off in a rapid flight, stopping only when he reached one of the walls that he actually crashed into. Shards of the structure flew in all directions. Sleep lay behind the broken wall, surrounded by shards and parts of the wall. He was exhausted but still conscious. All Sun had the strength to do was mutter insults at Chu. After gathering his strength, he still managed to get up on his elbow. Song had heard that Chu was talented, but was it really enough for him to memorize how to control the ki in the body with a single glance? Was this really a heaven-sent talent? When Song had already risen from the ground, Chu came to him, saying that this was not the end and that he had more to teach him. Chu started hitting Sung with tears in his eyes. Sung couldn't even imagine how long Chu had waited for this moment. Thinking back to the time when the now-adult Sung had beaten Chu himself, he felt like he was restoring justice. Chu was glowing from the significance of this moment as he continued beating Song, who was lying on the ground. Sung, unable to bear the pain of the beating, began to call Chu, son of a bitch, bastard. It seemed to him that he was about to die from the pain. As suddenly Chu stopped for a second, he was happy because his student finally understood how to vent anger. What Song was feeling right now was anger. Chu was now in his teacher's place and his teacher was in his place. Tears of joy flowed from Chu's eyes. After his words, Chu continued to be a screaming Sung, that he was no longer holding back in his expressions and was screaming profanity, not realizing what was wrong with this crazy bastard. Finished with the training, Chu decided to end the lesson with a strong uppercut that docked poor Sun in the air. Sung passed out. Weak, Chu thought, maybe I should have fed him the remaining precious spiritual plants. But to find the second spiritual treasure, Chu had to find one guy. The one who knew the whereabouts of the second spiritual treasure was Doksam, who should soon be in the Chanmu Union prison, and his meeting with the Servant of Chaos should happen in 6 months. It would be then that the Servant of Chaos would have to search for the spiritual treasure. And then, when he comes to Doksam, Chu will appear at the right moment and blow his head off his shoulders, preventing the arrival of chaos in its very beginnings. In that case, Chu's suffering will be over, and he will be able to live a normal life. But there is no guarantee that some unforeseen variable will not appear. Finished thinking, Chu lifted the unconscious Sung up. He still had work to do. Chu slung him on his shoulder, continuing his thoughts to be ready for all sorts of surprises. He would have to bring up his damn teachers just in case. Sleep regained consciousness and immediately screamed. He thought he was having a terrible nightmare where he was being beaten unconscious, but it wasn't a nightmare. He kept thinking how evil a person must be to beat a person so badly. But nothing, Sun will still be able to take revenge on him. He will do anything to take revenge. While Sung was saying all his thoughts, Chu entered the room. He was interested in Sung's words about revenge. He tried to refuse, but Chu clearly heard everything. Meanwhile, Chu came closer to Sung's bed and complained to him that he was too flimsy. Only a couple of blows, and he'd been lying uncreated for half a day. Chu pleased Sung by explaining to the elders that their bout was sparring. Sean was strongly disagreeing with the definition of sparring for that torture, but voiced his decision to wisely say nothing. Chan appreciated Chu's potential and that he could help his nephew become stronger. Chu told about another happy news. Now they will train together, as Chu is better than him and can teach him a lot. So now Sung and Chu are together, alone. From that moment on, their training began. Chu systematically beat Sung over and over again for 10 days. For 10 days, Sung endured the beatings without being able to somehow put up a decent resistance to Chu. But finally, Sung began to show progress, getting more invested in his punches when he was enraged. Sung was finally putting enough spiritual energy into his strikes. In just a few days, he had learned how to put anger into his sword. Still, only by pushing a person to the limit could one achieve rapid development. At this point, Chu decided to end his anger infusion training, dodging Sun's next but already more successful attack, Chu thought. It was time to move on to the anger extraction training. With that, Chu delivered a kick to Sun's chin. Chu's kick sent Sung flying into the air. The kick came out strong enough, but not strong enough to knock Sung out or cause serious damage. But to consolidate the effect of the training, Chu decided to deliver a couple more punches with his fists, as punishment for the missed punch. But then Sun's eyes flashed fire, and Chu felt that he clearly made a breakthrough in understanding what he taught Chu. Sun twisted around and tried to throw a powerful punch at Chu, but Chu had no problem dodging it, but he was still surprised. Sun was frustrated. He was full of hope that at least this time he would be able to punish his tormentor. However, Chu, who was already standing behind him with his fist raised to strike, did not let him get upset for long. He was afraid. Sun already imagined the pain of the blow. But suddenly Chu did not beat him, suggesting instead to go for a walk outside the gate. Sung wondered where Chu was going, but hesitated as he realized he had interrupted his favorite uncle. Chu thought to teach him a lesson for such insolence. But Sung quickly oriented himself, courteously giving place in front so that he could escort Chu wherever he wished. On the street, a beggar in shabby clothes sat among the market stalls, collecting alms from people who cared. On his head was a straw hat that covered his face. Suddenly someone approached him and threw a silver coin into the alms bowl, thus drawing the beggar's attention to himself. The beggar thanked the benefactor, and the man asked only to speak to him a little as a thank you. The man said that it was his first time in this city, and he had no friends here yet. At the same time, with the help of a special technique that hides words, he reported to his commander, who was hiding under the guise of a beggar, that there was no one with the name Jin in Namgung Manor. Pretending to continue the friendly dialogue, the commander under the guise of a beggar interjected, "Strangely, the man named Jin is not there and was not there." The subordinate continued his report. Although there was no person named Jin in the manor, there was one person who appeared there just right for the time of appearance. He continued speaking, saying that it was Yu Chu, Yu Wan's only son, who was currently still in the manor. Spoiled was interested in further instructions. How should they proceed? Should they call for reinforcements? Chu and Song walked out of the Namgung Manor and headed deeper into the city, heading in a direction only known to Chu alone. In a strange coincidence, they just passed by two chaos servants talking, which was just what Chu was discussing. In the end, the commander of the Chaos Intelligence decided to deal with everything with the forces that he had now. He did not want to anger the master once again. No one wanted to take away their head's time, and so Chu was put under surveillance in order to clarify the information about the thief. After finishing their conversation, the two men similarly decided to end their concert as well, something they had set up to separate the attention. It was time to move out, and immediately. The subordinate left, and the commander himself also began to pack. He still had a lot of things to do, especially since he should have personally supervised everything. The beggar was watched by two men. They kept the neighborhood, but this ragamuffin did not pay them anything, even though he received a huge alms. They had no way of knowing that he was not a simple homeless man. Chu had bought a large number of books containing sad and touching stories that Sung was now carrying. As long as Sung was born into a rich family, he couldn't taste the poverty and pain of his relatives. And for training, he needs to know this feeling. Having finished explaining to Song, Chu decided that it was time for them to go see a Beijing opera, something creepily funny. That Song realized what they would be doing next. His mood visibly rose. A dreamy smile appeared on his face. Joy gives calmness to the soul and prevents anger and sadness from overwhelming a person, Chu admonished. Sona wondered whether it was possible to see using such simple methods. Chu went on to explain that only one who possesses calmness can expand his horizons, thus one can improve his understanding of the enemy and his movements. The beggar that had been following Chu snuck into the theater. Now that he could get a better look at him, he realized that Chu was most likely the one who had stolen the ginseng. A group of people concealed by cloaks and wide hats were making their way through a field where crops were sprouting. This group should attack Chu with Song. Their task was to stealthily infiltrate the city, eliminate the target in the person of the heir Namgung. and Chu was to take care of their commander. The main thing they had to do was to do it secretly. But the commander was caught by the local bandits who were covering for the local beggars. At the noise drew the attention of Chu and Song. Looking around, they could see a group of people, gangster appearance. This group was heading towards the beggar, planning to show him what happens to those who don't pay for the space they occupy. The commander had to cancel the operation. The group of warriors stopped, hiding in a field of tall vegetation. The commander was very unhappy. What a bad time to be picked on by the local bandits. The problem was that he couldn't reveal himself. The bandits, however, kept accusing him and were about to muzzle him. They surrounded the commander, putting him in a ring. He could not reveal himself, looking like he would have to give himself a beating if he did not want to fail the mission. The bandits rushed towards the beggar with their fists, intending in this unsophisticated way to explain the rules of this world. The beggar was knocked down to the ground and beaten up. Sung noticed this and suggested to Chu to break up the fight, because it is mean to attack one person in a crowd. But Chu was not going to interfere because justice does not always prevail in the world, as in the books. This city is controlled by Namgung, but such small gangs almost never care, so they will still share this alley. These were very low-level gangsters, not related to the world of Marim in any way, so there was definitely no point in them getting involved. Simply put, it's just another fight between bandits over territory. Chu finished intoxicating what was going on, and as soon as Chu and Sleep were gone, the bandits were covered with an ominous aura. They laid beat the beggar cease. As suddenly one of their bandits flew out of the crowd from a hard hit, now hiding the commander of the Chaos Forces was gone, and it dawned on the bandits that they were in trouble. From the beaten beggar commander began to actively emanate evil power. The bandits began to pivot back, but they were already surrounded by people in dark cloaks. Ordering no one to interfere, the commander was going to deal with these lowlifes, beatings which he had to endure. And the leader of the bandits in fright ordered to attack the unknown beggar.